Yo, how are you doing, folks? Welcome to episode 57 of the Simpa Life Podcast. Another week has passed. It's getting very dark and dingy outside. Actually, looking at my guest, it seems it is midnight behind where she is, even though she's in the same country as me. Tonight's guest is another repeat of a previous guest. We're going to touch base on what has changed in the past 12 months since we first sat down and had quite an interesting, humorous and entertaining conversation. Just over 12 months ago now, I think, or just about 12 months ago. Tonight's guest is a formulation chemist with 20 years experience in the hydroponics industry. They have applied their academic qualifications into the sector to become a regular contributor to publications and research papers, becoming a respected medical cannabis advocate. She is also the director at Aqualabs, a plant scientist, educator, innovator, as well as an epilepsy warrior and my friend. How are you doing, Dr. Callie Seaman?
Good, thank you. Good. You can't see through that window, but that window there, I've got blue skies outside. What's it like up north? I know the temperature's dropped.
It is very much up. We had a first ground frost yesterday, which is a shame for all the mushroom hunters up here. But yeah, I think you can see behind there, it's just this grey dinginess. I hate this time of year when I record because I can't open the curtains because it's a grey glare. But then, like, shutting it, it just creates this wash of dinginess.
Yeah. We've got blue skies here down in Sheffield, so it's nice and crisp. But I think this weekend we're getting down to 2 degrees. But don't you think it's took a while to actually get this cold? I mean, we're at the end of November, and you just said first ground frost. I think we had ours the other day, and it's still not as cold as it should be, or it normally is. I should say, normally.
Well, I think quite a lot of the mycologists out there will probably back me up on this. The people that have been out regularly picking season on season, there seems to be a delaying in the onset of the seasons. So there seems to almost be, hold the calendar stationary and then just move the seasons along slightly. Yeah. I think that's very much what it feels like. Much milder Christmases than I obviously had as a kid in December's. January's in the north, we've got, paradoxically, we either get very vicious ones or very mild ones, but then that will always now lead to a very cold February. And then our springs are often quite delayed or feeling quite delayed. So these days, yeah, it is quite weird, really, to notice the differences. I mean, we used to notice it, I suppose, in crop rotations. So in the UK, obviously, we'll have procured most of our food from local. So it will have actually been grown with the cycles. Whereas now you have pineapples and watermelons and all sorts everywhere. So you don't really think of what's growing and you don't have that same intimate connection to the seasonal cycle.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, this year, watching Spring Watch, there was a delay with the actual, I think there was an oak tree didn't actually come out because of this cold. The cold of February, which then the caterpillars didn't come out and feed on this, which then the blue tits weren't able to then feed on them. So there's a whole knock-on effect. As you say, it's like the shifting of the seasons are happening at the moment where things are sort of, and September is now being warm, is almost behaving like August.
Yeah, with September's in the north, it used to be a lot wetter. And so I noticed this from running the events at Durham City Cannabis Club. Is when we started putting on events through the summer, we typically try and stop in August because September was, you couldn't really tell what was going on with it. And then more and more people in the community started putting on events in September. So September became a full month. So then it was the back end of September was the change or the end of we used to call it the activist season or the event calendar season. So yeah, you can really see it changing.
Yeah. I'm not going to even mention global warming. Oh, we're not going down that one.
I suppose this is a very interesting thing. I suppose it's something we'll touch on loosely here. I will first preface this by saying I do not have necessarily an opinion to either side, but there is an interesting debate to be had, I guess, in a curious way, about climate change as it currently stands. That isn't to say in the slightest I'm a climate change denier. There's more than enough scientific evidence to show change. What I would speculate on is something that people like Graham Hancock and others have touched on, that our cycles and histories maybe go through more of a cycle than we realize. So we're now looking at astrology and understanding that perhaps there's a larger cycle. The Earth moves from the sun every, 12 to 16,000 years. Then as we start to observe more data, we can go, well, actually it changes the lunar cycle after so many iterations. And then because of the expansion of the universe, the cooling of certain, there's so many different other physical aspects of the larger out there that could affect us down here. And that isn't to deny or say that we're not having an impact, because clearly we are. You know, if you take a correlatory image, say, for example, the uptake of greenhouse gases being captured in the 20th century and the criminalization of cannabis. So in 1934, with the creation of the Marijuana Tax Act in America, that was when it first started getting restricted. That's when greenhouse gases started going up. So cannabis wasn't used as the resource in paper. It wasn't being used alongside soy and flax in research towards polymers. Plastics took over that. So then they started producing excess amounts of carbon, whereas before we were using carbon sink. So the crops that we grew sequestered the carbon we were polluting into the system. But then since basically the steam revolution, and we started using the internal combustion engine, we've not really counted that. Now, it's only now over the past 5 years or so we're actually having a decent conversation about carbon capture. Yeah. So even just knowing those things, we know we have a hell of a lot more carbon. According to the maps and the records that we have, things are warmer, the climates are different. But again, I think we have to take into consideration things like the old tide lines, things like, look at the Grand Canyon, look at the old topography of our world. If you understand how Pangea existed as the first continent and the breakup and the floating of the tectonic plates. And so there is a much larger mechanism at play here that I think, yes, we do have a significant part to play in. And I think that tackling our carbon is a way of doing that. But I don't necessarily think that the current narrative is to the benefit of people. It is to the benefit of corporations.
It's been marketed. There's this greenwashing, this marketing that I think is being taken advantage of, and that's my problem with it. I'm say the cycles of the sun itself. We're getting solar flares that will cause different things to occur on the Earth itself. I mean, there was a documentary, and it was a river in the Amazon that over a period of 20 years it would rise to different heights, and this was also correlating with what was happening with the solar flares that were occurring and the cycles with that. So if that's having an effect on Earth, as you say, we're in this cycle where we are naturally warming already. But what I'm seeing a lot of, and what with sort of this COP26 and everything that is involved, with there, was it was a lot of marketing and a lot of opportunities for companies to say, this is what we are doing to contribute. And I'm not against that, but there's this whole kind of way we're being manipulated by this the media, this whole way of they want us to think rather than doing things that are genuinely helping. And I don't know what the way around all of it is. It's this greenwashing terminology and I think, I mean, you touched on sort of psychedelics a bit earlier. I'm a little bit worried of what's happening with that kind of sector coming of what I've seen with the cannabis sector. And this is the next one that we were jumping on to. And is this going to then be, again, raped with sort of manipulation of this, of what we actually need is the purified compounds. We don't need to be using the plant forms. And as you say, we're almost locking carbon up within plastics so that recycling isn't occurring, which with plants, when we're using those as compounds, there's a recycling of things. Yeah. Whereas when we're purifying them, are they then becoming recycled, or what are they then being metabolized into within us, and the fate of those?
Exactly. Those are becoming what the term forever chemicals, which at the height of fearmonger and propaganda of the reefer madness in America, which was caused by industrialists, was when these forever chemicals were first started to being created. So we spoke off air of what do they call it? Teflon, the non-stick coating, and the chemical component in that, the hydrocarbon chain that is produced in that, I think it's called C8. I can't remember the other component name for it. That's now in everybody. That's in all humans. Because of because it's a forever chemical, so our bodies can't break it down. So even if you don't get it from direct exposure to the pan onto the food, and then from the food, then when that food breaks down and goes into another animal that's then eating the biodegradable material of that, when that gets eaten into a chain and that gets eaten, then you will get it back. It stays forever. And to quickly cycle back that thing you said about the Amazon and the rise in water, my brain went to an analogy of a grow room. If you suddenly spikes in temperature outside and your tent goes to 40 degrees, you're evaporating all of that water. Your water level in those plants are going to drop right down. Whereas then if you drop the temperature, but the water level stays the same, your water level rises in your plants. They get more logged because they're not evaporating or processing the water through. So it makes sense to me that your solar flare is energy effectively. So then obviously the Amazon being one of the largest basins to absorb this light source, it would have some reaction to that. And we're starting to understand very naively, I'll admit, because unfortunately, most scientists have been trained into single study, single field, provable, peer-reviewed. Do you know what I mean?
Mixed data analysis dead easy though, mate. Come on.
Yeah.
One thing, one variable, and just on the scientist point of view, that's why it's done, because it makes easy conclusions. But the reality of...
I get that, but then it's then applying that conclusion. So if you've then studied, right, I'm going to go study how roots work in plants, and you spend 40 years studying roots, but you never learn about mycology, about mycelium and the reciprocal relationships, you're missing half of your data. If you then don't look at let's study soil, those two things interact with the soil, they interact with the water, So this is what I'm saying about over-specialization in certain industries has meant that people with the narrative, which is the corporations that go, well, we produce these forever chemicals and we don't want to get sued. We want to continue going forever. Shout out to anyone want to watch Dark Water, the Mark Ruffalo directed and produced film about all of this. Really, really good movie.
Is it going to scare me? Am I going to have nightmares after it?
I'll admit that I stood in my partner's kitchen afterward and stared at all of the pots, pans and containers in there and really had a moment of going, shit.
I'm going to have a moment like after The Social Dilemma, where I went into my purse and cut every single loyalty card up and threw them out. Every single one I just got rid of. Apps on my phone, gone.
I think you might have a similar moment. And this basically, it tells the narrative. And actually, I suppose what a good thing. Here you go. Here's some homework for you guys. I don't know if you actually listen. I know you listen to me on this platform, whether you listen to me go do this.
Pen.
There we go. Yeah, so watch this dark water movie, sorry, about this. Basically, this guy was a lawyer. He was quite going high up in a legal firm, and he came from West Virginia. West Virginia, and basically an area where DuPont had a major manufacturing plant, and they basically were the government. They controlled all employment, so they funded everything, sponsored everything. They made nice with everything. And this lawyer, because of his grandmother's connection to a local farmer, went down to meet with this guy to see about his cattle dying and about the toxins and the poisons of the water. And this guy kind of, what the hell? Went back to his law firm, which was Taft Law Firm, one of America's most legal establishments, and basically said, look at this. DuPont was one of their major clients, as well as many of the other biochemical petroleum companies and other chemical companies. And he managed to convince them to actually take on this case. And he has been fighting it for 20 odd plus years. And in the discovery of that, you found the obfuscation of the truth, how they hid it, in the same way the tobacco companies hid the cancer research. Mm-hmm. So alongside watching Dark Water, there's a recent thing come out called Dope Sick. All one word, Dope Sick. It's got Michael Keaton in. It's a dramatization of the Purdue and Sackler debacle around OxyContin, and it shows how Richard Sackler corrupted the FDA, how they infiltrated various legal entities, including the judicial system, including the legal systems, and they perpetuated this lie and this narrative of no to low addiction for their tablets, and then how they increased it, the marketing, all of it. If you then compare these two things together, you get an idea of the broad spectrum approach these companies have. So they create the narratives, and then they go to these specialist science that have the exact knowledge of their individual pursuit. Go, we want that one, and that one. Put them together. Your data, when we cherry pick it, promotes our narrative. Here's a paycheck. You're on. And then these entities, they pay for think tanks, they pay for organizations and huge... Oh, my camera's not working. I guess I've annoyed somebody there, folks.
Smiley face.
My camera's just reset. It's never done that before. Here we go. Hey.
Who's listening to us? Who's decided to censor us?
But yeah, you see, it gives you an idea of how this narrative works, because again, I believe that those scientists, as you say, are people like yourself that give a shit, that are passionate, that have then gone, I want to know the truth. But the more you pursue it, you get you get fenced into this thing of going, well, you're a formulation chemist only. You don't need to understand how pharmaceutical industry works. You don't need to understand the marketing, the advertising of it. You don't need to understand the proliferal consequences of it to the environment, to health, to whatever. You just need to tell us how that one compound interacts according to our data and our sales pitch.
Yeah. And it's sad because I've had this kind of realization lately of this. I don't know if you remember, about 3 years ago, we did something called Can Talks at Cambridge University. And there's a friend of mine, she's writing up a thesis at the moment, and she's actually wrote about this. Is very interesting thesis. Jessica Steinberg, watch out for her. And she's writing up about, you know, how the actual interactions of cannabis and how it's developed through society. So she's been to Chile, or she's been all over. And she sort of speaks about this event, and it brought sort of back to, like, I remember being on a panel with another scientist and someone who was actually anti-cannabis. He was, when I say anti-cannabis, he was actually arguing that we can't say cannabis does not cause harm. Now, you can't say it doesn't cause harm. Now, if you're comparing to the harm that alcohol causes, that's a very different statement. I think
it's the word that, it's a very loaded, locked sentence. So it needs to be that, no, nothing is safe. Nothing is safe in the world, but it isn't to say that then it's always dangerous. They are two extremes. There is an entire spectrum of conversation in the middle.
Yeah, and that's what he was trying to. And one of the things we were talking about is one of the barriers to actually doing research is funding, and the only funding that is really available within the cannabis industry is by licensed producers, is by cannabis companies, and they want a particular answer to that, and that isn't what you call true science. I can't go to Innovate UK and apply for, they just look at it and go, well, it's medicine if you're doing stuff to look at the cannabinoid content. So you would go to, one of the kind of, Royal Society of Chemistry, and they would just sort of look at you as if to go, cannabis, all right. You're up against, if it was synthetics, different matter. Very, very different matter if you're researching that side of things. But to do any kind of research that is on full plant extract, they're not interested because you've got too much to it. They classify everything other than the THC, CBD as contaminants because of the way that registration is in this country. The whole kind of framework here isn't working. It's just not working in the sense.
It's not working for the patients. I would argue it's working exactly for the system.
The people making large amounts of money, individuals making large amounts of money.
And I'll caveat this by stating and clarifying it a little, actually, so I'm not too ambiguous here. I don't necessarily then believe that it is even the clinics or the front-facing physicians. It is the international investment vessels that are hedging this, that are gambling on our futures, that are quite happy to proliferate prohibitive propaganda while then profiting from the creation of prescribed cannabis, medical cannabis, whatever you want to call it, as a separate industry and entity. And so I feel that any further division, any further conflict between the arbitrary binary dichotomies that they've created works to their favor. Every time somebody stands against somebody else that's cannabis because they're not their kind of cannabis, they profit. It helps then solidify that there will be a prescribed therapeutic cannabis sector. There will be an agricultural cannabis sector, or as they want to call it, hemp, low THC, whatever you want to term it. There will then be a CBD wellness and just a superficial thing where you're allowed about 4% CBD, and it's just enough for your skin to maybe go a bit brighter, or for you to just slightly get enough of a cortisol drop or something to feel it. So your body will actually go, oh, it's something. But then if you actually need that real therapeutic benefit from it, you're going to have to move into that prescribed single compound, more than likely biosynthesized or synthetic cannabinoids. And I'm going to be sat as a druggie in a hoodie, defending kids knifing each other on bikes and all of this other crap because of the system that they've created through the criminalization, because we don't accept their narrative. I don't want the government. I don't want private health involved in the autonomy of my healthcare. Yeah, I don't seek to go, and others can choose. And I'm not saying against the system. I'm not a binary arguer here. I am literally for everyone's right to their own. But what I want is not the invasion of my privacy. The government doesn't get involved with me and go, hey, what did you eat for breakfast? Did you know that's not good for you? You should be eating this. You should be eating, like, seriously.
It'd be better if they did. It'd be better. Do you know what? If they did that, we might actually have less problems if we started going, hold on, what's this shit you're putting in your mouth? But, you know, there isn't one way of fixing this. There isn't one solution to the cannabis industry. And I don't like this idea of having to register if you are, you know, growing, say, 4 plants. You know, if you're growing your own personal, self-sustaining, I don't see why you don't have to register the fact that you're growing potatoes if it's for yourself. Now, if you're at the point of starting to sell that, then different. You're going into the realm of you're supplying somebody else. So you should, you know, take some responsibility for that. If you are choosing to grow that yourself and ingest that yourself, I just don't like this whole idea. And this is where my kind of opinions have been really changing and forming and kind of growing over these last kind of 3 years. And the fact that we've had this pandemic going off and this change, I've come out the other side viewing the world very differently. There's a lot of things happened. I mean, I've spoke to death and things. Me and my son, he saved my life. I had a seizure whilst driving the car. Which really did. That was a bizarre thing coming back from. Even I would put it in the same realms of the DMT experience I had, of how it changed my perception of thinking, how certain neurons had connected together and come back and just valued life very differently, value everything really differently. And if people haven't come out the other side of this period of time, changed, I'm questioning what's going off. I genuinely am, of going, if you're not thinking about how you're living your life, what you're doing, what your contribution, what your consumption is, how much you're consuming of just the world. I know I was a very different person. I mean, when I first met you, a very, very different person. And I believe that, yes, we should all be registered. And I'm a bit like, hold on a minute, why can't I just use cash when I want? Why do you need my email address and my postcode? I just want to buy those printer cartridges, please. I don't want to give you all my information. And
that's, I think we're entering a very interesting phase in history. As you say, the global pandemic and I'm going to be careful with my words here. Let's call it a knee-jerk authoritarian response by various Western governments. So they chose to take it as an opportunity to accelerate what were already pre-existing plans. So I don't fit in and I don't ascribe to the neoliberalistic left-right-wing political ideology. My ideology falls far beyond that. It is a limitation of a conversation. They are saying that, all right, you're allowed ideas and concepts, but only if you fit in this narrow spectrum. And you can even be left or right-wing extreme in them, but actually they approach the bell curve to meet each other. It's still an idea that I get control over others, where actually it's wrong to me. I'd rather live in a world where I could choose to get in my car, drive 130 miles an hour and crash into another one, than live in a world where the technology, because the same with the food. I'd rather be able to go to a pub and drink myself to death. I'd rather be able to sit in my house for a week solid and gorge myself on something so sugary that I give myself an insulin spike and die. We have to be able to live freely, but be educated of the dangers of the world. And what we have ended up with, this corporate washing, and it feels like the modern war on drugs, since the creation of the global war on drugs, they have had an apparatus and a tool to go, okay, go do what the hell you want. But the people that have a propensity to live outside of that left-right-wing division will operate doing drugs or in drug culture, regardless of their division. And you'll have found it as well at festivals and free parties. I have danced, sweated, and cuddled with people that probably have some extreme ideologies when they're sober. But in those moments, it doesn't matter because they are human. And I have watched people that are bigoted, racist, homophobes, cuddling gay men. I've watched one of my best friends when I was a young man kiss a man and be literally loving, who was literally the most homophobic man in the world. Do you know what I mean? Just as a kind of, he was expressing and being present and showing that I am human, I am raw, I am vulnerable.
Did he change his opinion after that experience by any chance? Did he?
Yes, massively, yeah. And again, so I think that we have to be allowed to be wrong. We have to be allowed to be twats and arseholes. We have to be, but it's true though. There is no good without bad. There is no light without dark. And if we try and narrow human existence into going, this is what it is to be alive, and if you don't believe as I believe, then you are wrong and you are bad, then we're never allowed to question authority. And it narrows down experience and existence until the vast majority of people fall outside of the bell curve of existence. And I feel that's where we are in history. And there are people that have come out of this or that are still in this that will not question it. And the reason they won't question it, their needs are served. They are part of the class. They are part of the group of individuals who the world is being built and designed for. I said this the other day about co-option, and I've been shouting this for a long time about cannabis and drugs. LGBTQ. It went from Stonewall riots, the cops taking off their badges and shit and them attacking and violently trying to destroy a community of gay and queer folk, to then the cop vans in the UK having Pride Month and plastering these flags on the side when they're still committing atrocities and violence, when they're still one of the most targeted groups, so they're still vilified. All the brands can come along and, oh, we're all Pride. And you got Skittles come along and make white bloody Skittles going, this is for Pride, and all of these other things. Like, no, you've saved money to then co-opt into this system, to then align yourself with a cultural ideal that you are still supporting at the corporate level, at tax level, at governance level. Mm. And the same is happening with drugs now. And I feel that we have to create these spaces. It's one of the main reasons I created this platform where we can have these conversations to go, look, somebody is seriously fucking wrong. But it doesn't mean we have to have this binary bullshit debate of going, well, you're right of me and you're left of me or you're center. Like, the positions are irrelevant. We're human and we're all in the same group. If we're questioning it, that means we're not in their boat. The waters are rising, the tides are getting higher, and they're comfortable on their yachts. We're starting to drown, and we can either go and laugh at each other that are drowning on our shores seeking a better life and vilify the human that just wants to exist, or we can turn around and go, who are the people that are making us live this way? Who are the ones that are making me pick up a paper and instead of seeing 26 dead human beings, I see refugees or immigrants, scroungers coming to live off our benefit, parasites. It's an insanity, and that narrative is then perpetuated by the same ones that stood at Cop Out 26. Going, oh, we're the biggest polluters in the world, but what we're going to do is no, we need to destroy them, eradicate them. As you said, question what we are doing. I do not need tat coming from the other side of China from an enslaved economy when I can then repurpose, recycle, upuse, or even question my need for that thing in the first goddamn place. We need to address what it is that we have. We live with such excess and privilege. Even the most impoverished people in the West still live with a privilege that it's hard to speak. Water. Wait. But I'm sorry, I was just about to say, in this country, maybe not over the past 12 months, but we have running water, we can put it that way. But it just shows that we have far more in common with the people that we put into indentured servitude in the developing nations to supply us the tat that we need to enrich billionaires than the billionaires. Even the guys that are making 250 grand a year and drive around in Mercedes and shit, they are still closer to you on benefit than the people that have set this system up. Don't let the illusion be true. Just because your politician's on 86 grand or whatever and you're thinking no, man, no, they are puppets that are invested. They are, what's the word? Not courted.
Indoctrinated?
Yeah, they're indoctrinated, and pedophiles do it to children, groomed, and they are groomed through the education system, through family institutions. They are picked, literally, oh, your son David there's in 40 years, he'll be leading the country. And every part of his life is workshopped, manufactured, so that when he is there, he will serve the interests of these billionaire classes. The corporate wealth transfer during the pandemic, and I can't remember how many extra millions of people slid from middle class in this country into poverty, but at the same time, the 1,000 richest people in the world doubled their wealth.
I can't get my head around that. I can't get my head around how one person needs millions of pounds. Just one person what do you do with it? What do you?
I think it's an illness. It's a form of hoarding. So there's an interesting anecdote I think I told on a previous podcast of I think he's a Christian writer and sort of thinker, Tom Hartman, and I think I saw him in a documentary speak of the truth, what he called the truth of this. And he said, if you're alone, naked and cold in the woods, it's raining, you're in a miserable state. If somebody comes along and offers you clothing, shelter, food, and a fire, you are 0 to happy. You are content, you are comfortable, you've got everything you need. The lie of capitalism, or the lie of neoliberalistic capitalism, is that if X amount will make you X happy, more will infinitely make you happy. So every time will make you happier. And then the compounding effect of this is predestination fixation, which is the idea that the next thing is what will get you there. The next relationship, the next promotion, the next client I sign, the next blog I write. And I'm guilty of this. And we're trained into this because that is the work ethic of neoliberalistic capitalism, because then we're forever working towards building profit, building a system for their benefit. So they live in affluence and comfort that when the world seemed to come to an end during the start of the pandemic, they got bailouts for their companies. They got all of these taxing, whereas everyone else was sat going, well, you've locked us in our house. We've got no other choice but to use Amazon and give Bezos tens of billions of pounds, or use these home shopping systems from we were forced into giving corporations because they made it illegal for the small mom and pop business to operate. And so whether they chose to do that or not, whether Bezos's people, whether all of these other international conglomerates had their lobbyists talking about this, or whether it's just an unwritten thing that they saw an opportunity to screw over the little guy and transfer more wealth to the top. It's hard to say. It's hard to say.
I mean, I live in the north, and walking down the high street now, there's just shop after shop after shop empty. Little businesses that I knew were family-run businesses gone. Just gone. But then there were others that just went, right, we're adapting. So local sandwich shop went, well, we can serve from the door. We're doing nothing wrong. We're cooking. And we've also got to adapt. We've also got to accept that we need to adapt to what is happening around us as well, and not just giving up on what we're being told. We need to say, oh, what can we actually do? Come on, then. Let's do this. I mean, Aqualabs, we never stopped. We never stopped anywhere through the pandemic. We just kept going and kept going. We kept the bubble small. And it's just about adapting. I mean, I'm seeing the hydro industry at the moment it's suffering. It's
scary. I know it's obviously somewhat quite contentious at the minute, so I understand if you don't want to answer this question. But could you sort of give us, or my listeners, a bit more of an insight as to what is going on? I have a bit of an idea of kind of what is going on, but I am aware that there obviously is a great hesitance from within the industry to publicize external pressures that are being placed upon them.
That's one for another time, I think.
Fair one. No, it's interesting. I've had other people from the industry on the podcast that have responded in similar sort of ways. I'll just say this as an anecdote with no need for a response, but one of the previous guests, I asked about washing machines, and they went on to tell me about their preference of how they wash their clothes. So it's a very interesting and contentious industry at the minute. I obviously do want to seek guests that are capable and confident to be able to say about the state of the situation. And one thing I will state, maybe is my own personal thought here as a last note before we move on with it. Those same hydro shops during lockdown that were forced to shut, their business was transferred onto Amazon.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so it's then become a very interesting thing that the hydro industry was always quite rebellious, and then parts of it had to concede, and then some of them were like, no, we're garden centers, will stay open. And I think that some of them are adapting, and some of them are trying to pull back customer bases. But I think as a peripheral industry, they're not really supported by the new licensed producers and the big boys. They're all vertically integrated production. They want to buy everything else out. So I think hopefully I'll be able to get a guest in the not too distant future that can talk about what I see as a potential, unfortunately, extinction event for the hydro industry unless there's some reform there. But I'll draw a pin in that and we'll tactfully move on there. So yes, then talking of this vertically integrated nature of the cannabis industry at the minute, it seems to be once you have a license, you buy everything under you. That's the goal. Once you've got your license, you can go and do whatever the hell you want. So whether it's you're a licensed producer in Canada or even in sort of Australia, I think Israel are moving towards as well international exports, or have moved towards international exports. I know some of the US states are trying to figure that one out, but that'll become as part of federal. And so there is sort of an issue around we're negating the benefits of the plant. We're importing cannabis from all over the goddamn world, creating huge carbon footprints. We're not giving jobs to people that have experience and expertise in their local economies and communities. Do you think there's a way to shake that up, or is that capitalists capitalizing?
I think the problem, one of the big barriers is being able to set up a facility and the cost implications of that, the licensing. So you're never going to see the smaller boys getting to come in. And that's quite sort of, it's sad to see. I really, from what I've seen in these last 3 years, I can't see anybody of the everyday man making a success of this. And it's quite sad to see, because the best knowledge is from the legacy market, is from all them growers over the years that I've seen coming through the shops. There's some absolutely amazing people, and they really haven't got a chance other than going to work for others. But again, because it's international, they've already got their growers in, or their methodology, their SOPs in place. How we shake this industry up at the moment, I'm really not sure. I'm trying to really figure that one out at the moment, because unless you're involved with somebody who's got a lot of money, you haven't got a chance of getting a license.
It's interesting because the more they narrow it and the more they cherry pick, and they, instead of going to the legacy market, instead of going to the people who have this knowledge, and not only that, had the fortitude to develop this knowledge during criminalization when they were prohibited from doing so, I think then they just add more and more of us to the other pile. And then if we just rename the other pile everybody else, and we pull together, we have resource. If everybody that is excluded from the current industry got together and just built a separate industry using their tools, using their licenses, using their apparatus, we could create a parallel industry, a shadow economy. And I think that that's the only other alternative we have. We either allow them to buy us out and take us over, or we let them destroy us, or we create this alternative model.
I think that alternative thing is already there. They call it the black market, or
yeah,
you know,
very, very true. Yeah.
And I think it's there. I think, and what you're seeing is now the legacy market is actually producing connoisseurs. So there are certain strains and certain growers who can charge more for what they're producing than what is actually being seen on the legal market at this moment in time. If that will change, I do not know. We do need a domestic supply in this country. There needs to be, as you say, about the carbon footprint. Why are we importing the prescribed cannabis into this country all the way from Australia? Why is that? Why are we not producing it in this country so it's a lot fresher? There's a number of licensed producers who have got license, but everything is research-based. Everything. I'm not seeing anything that's commercial.
Yeah, which is interesting, because there are now 3 home office licenses for high THC production. So one went to, is it Northern Leaf? I think was the second one. GW was obviously the first. Mm-hmm. The third one is a UK arm of an international producer, and I can't think who it is off the top of my head. It's in one of my blogs on the website. But if they are for research, how is it that GW have used their license since 2014, whatever it is, 2013, to produce and sell Sativex to over 26 countries? This is what I don't understand. How is it that then, because you talk about we need production here. GW were estimated to produce 100 tons at the last time I researched this. 100 tons of cannabis. That is insanity. Where is it all going? Why is it not here? It's
going abroad. It's been processed. They got sold and made into Jazz Pharmaceuticals. Why is it not being used here? I wish I had the answer to that. Again, corruption, and it makes me ask all these questions around this industry.
It's money. It keeps it looking magical. And this is why I advocate, and I'm not necessarily fighting the medical cannabis paradigm, but I'm just trying to get people to go that no, all cannabis has potential therapeutic application. And what you're doing is buying a pharmaceutical grade product. And if you're buying the raw flower, and actually what we're seeing now with Moldgate 2.0, as they're calling it, and I've got several meetings with I've got several meetings with patients over the next few days because I'm actually doing an investigative piece for the website to try and understand what is happening here, because it seems to be there are two tiers within the system. There are people who came from cannabis, have experience and knowledge of what the flower is, what terpenes are, how it should affect them in previous experience. There are then the novice that have suddenly gone, well, I've read all these things and I've always been curious of cannabis and I've always wanted to go in there, but because it's illegal, I don't want to touch it. Now it's legal, I can get access to it, and it's, well, I don't know any better. So they're happy with it. I mean, obviously it is having a benefit because, I mean, you can smoke dirt weed, ditch weed, and as long as it's got a minor cannabinoid content and some terpenes, you will have some form of benefit from it because you are supplementing your endocannabinoid system. You are then from that working on peripheral other pathways and neurological pathways that are then going to make you have a physiological and neurological response to it. So the plant doesn't care whether it was grown in the best grade factory and everyone's wearing hairnets and white suits, or it is two Vietnamese children that have been trafficked here. And I'm sorry to say if this is contentious, but I would say that the children, the Vietnamese kids that have grown it, is probably going to be a better product in terms of the end quality of it. The stuff put in production, however, may be different. That may be a negative culmination of salt-based nutrients rather than trying to do something a bit different. Although saying that, you do have no-till crops that are coming through with some of these larger entities. As you said, they are now moving into connoisseur markets. They'd rather grow a better, cleaner quality product, have a smaller yield, and then sell at a higher rate and create their brand and identity that way. So actually what we're seeing now is these larger entities are actually just criminal gangs from other regions. So it's interesting at the minute, to not sidebar too hard here. The UK government this year have done some very confusing things and a bit counterintuitive, in my opinion. They signed a deal in July with the Albanian Justice Minister and the UK Justice Minister, stating that any Albanian national that is caught growing cannabis can be exported back home, will be sent home. The Albanian government will pay for their extradition back to their home country, and they will be imprisoned at home. They've now just announced very quietly that they're going to be helping to fund a program in Albania to try to dissuade Albanian youth from coming over here and becoming gangsters. So it shows you they're aware of this. And part of what is going on with, I think, the attacks on the hydro industry, attacks on vendors and growers, is the fact that organizations and entities from places like the former Soviet Eastern European bloc, places like Latvia, Estonia, Albania, they have a large presence growing huge pockets of cannabis in the UK, and they're able to provide these boxes at dirt price. So they're able to put incredibly well smelling and good looking, but probably badly grown in terms of the nutrients that are put in them, Stardog variants and Amnesia hairs. And they can put that on the street in the north, in the south, in Scotland, in Wales for $1.40 an ounce. Doesn't matter.
I've heard less. I've heard 90. I've heard, and it's,
actually, I suppose the closer you are to a distribution hub, like where you are close to the warehouse, the money is then added on the risk of transport. So when these boxes are moving 200, 300 miles away, the little bit of drink will be added on for the driver, for the smuggler, for this guy, for that guy, for the dealer in the middle. So actually, the closer you are, so I can imagine you can get even cheaper. But then that's still juxtaposed with the average calculation. I think I haven't done an updated calculation for the last time that I grew, but when I was growing several years ago, I think I worked it out at about £35 an ounce. That I could cultivate an ounce of whatever cultivar I wanted, train it, play with it, enjoy it, get to have that experience and feedback with it, and put whatever I wanted into it and have the knowledge of how it had been grown for about 35 to 40 quid an ounce.
That was based on your electricity,
everything, nutrients, the lot. Obviously, I didn't factor into that my time because I was getting my time back. Whereas if I was a dealer or a seller, then you would have to calculate in how many hours a week you're working into it and earn that back. I understand that. So this is why the connoisseur market price is variant, whereas the market itself is pretty stagnant. It has been for a long time, £10 a gram. You pay sometimes £460 an ounce for these Callie imports. I'm air quoting there for my listeners, because half of them are not real. Obviously, we know they're not real. But I have met farmers in California that do export boxes, so I do know that it does happen. It does, yeah. But whether they then arrive in the UK and are the same, hard to state. But yeah, the logistics of that means that we're getting screwed. So actually what you're doing is you're incentivizing these criminal organizations to be able to make a shit ton of money, and they're literally sending it out of ports.
Yeah.
So they're also importing, they're not just growing here, they're importing huge amounts of grown from other regions. So you've got to remember that where there are legal markets bordering illegal markets, there is a fucking huge price discrepancy because people are happy to pay for it. And because then the quality and consistency becomes sort of standardized within those legal markets, and it affects then the quality and standards of neighboring markets, because people either have to try and raise up, which means that the prices raise up, so it cuts out all of the hobbyists, or the hobbyists have to create a connoisseurs market. So we're ending up in this mechanism that legalization is actually incentivizing more criminal gangs, whereas if they were to just decriminalize, or in the first instance, our activities, we could then be producing our own ounces for 30, 40 quid, and a 90 pound ounce wouldn't incentivize us. Do you know what I mean? And then we could have money and cash flow that if we were allowed to trade amongst ourselves. This is why I'm having a backlash against people who are talking about Luxembourg and Italy and are saying, I mean, Italy especially, are saying, oh, you can grow 4 at home, but we're going to double to triple the penalties for you selling it and trading it. So that to me is, you're trapping them in poverty. Yeah, they can grow weed and not have to then give money to gangsters or whatever, but can they then make money from it? No, but you're going to bring in licensed producers that are going to make billions from it. And all you've actually done is create people at home that want to then grow weed, get into weed, maybe can't grow it very well, that then all of a sudden when you open 100 dispensaries, are going to be buying weed off you every day.
But if you are selling it, you do need to take some responsibility for supplying other people. So there needs to be something, then there definitely needs to be something of saying, hold on a minute, if you are going to sell this, you do need to be I want to see more certificates of analysis. I actually want to see more labs in the country available so people can understand what they are consuming. That is one of his big problems here. And that goes for everything. I want it to be available. We're never going to stop people taking drugs of any form. People are going to. It's part of the human consciousness to want to alter that due to certain substances. I've had some very life-altering experiences and looked at life very, very differently. I would have preferred if I could have actually known exactly what it was I was getting. I couldn't tell you that for sure. I would have felt better knowing that. And I would like to be in a system where I can make that choice of going, right, yeah, I definitely know that is what it is. It's not cut with anything else. And it's the same for cannabis as well. Yeah. We need to be able to have this means of being able to know exactly what we're consuming or what is causing us problems. I mean, I think you spoke about that your other half, she has a problem with a particular terpene. Was it limonol that caused an issue?
No, it was anything sort of, it was one of the citrus ones. It was, sorry.
Oh, I thought you were being sick there.
It just appeared on my lap. There's a tiny gap under my desk that he just kind of shoots himself through.
The thought of that terpene was making you sick. That's what I thought happened. Oh, bless.
I can't remember which is off the top of my head, but it's what combines to create like an orangey terpene. So it's things that are in like tangy. That it again, if to look at what the old language of sativa indica, of what most people would understand it to be, it would have what people would associate to be too much of a sativa effect for her. She finds it too neurologically stimulating. She finds it too opening rather than closing. So that's the spectrum I talk of when I think of like terpenes is the,
this is the problem.
I shut into with one terpene, like on a spectrum. And then the other end of it is and it's like, caffeine, I'm stimulated.
Well, this is the problem. You can't tell me. If you knew that, if you got a particular strain, you sent it off and gone, right, we've got to stay away from this. This is what we need to. And that's the problem. And that's when I was saying earlier about that we can't say cannabis doesn't cause harm. Mm-hmm. As to what degree, but it's understanding what that harm is or what those potential problems are, because that could send someone over the edge, that happening. And it's just been aware of that, of those kinds of risks as well.
Exactly. And this is what I think a lot of these temporary psychosis and schizoid type reactions are about, is not the cannabinoids, because of terpenes work in synergy. I'm talking from chemist here. As you know, obviously terpenes and all of the other compounds work in synergy together. And we're seeing that isolated synthetic cannabinoids are having unexpected psychoactive effects and consequences. Just look at, I hate to say the terminology of it, but the spice epidemic, I'm air quoting that again for my listeners. Just look at the studies of prison populations in the UK, for example, as well. But then what we're seeing with cannabinoids plus terpenes, there seems to be a protection of the potential for synthetic cannabinoids to be harmful. But then if the terpenes almost mismatched to the individual, if they were to have a difficult reaction to the terpene, it increases the difficult reaction they're having to the what's the term for it? Because it's SCRA, synthetic cannabinoid receptor antagonist is the term for them. They're not synthetic cannabinoids per se. That's the group of them. You know what I mean? That it maximizes then the potential negative effects of that, and that we need to study, because I think that in isolation will give us an idea of how individual terpenes are having these effects. Because we spoke of this even, I think, on episode 4, of that you and I could sit and smoke the same joint and have two very different effects. I could end up couch locky and proper raw, and corporate education on this is not helping. So they're going indica sativa, one will wake you up, one will put you to bed. And they're not perpetuating good science because they don't want an informed public. So it's very frustrating to me that the adult consumption market is limiting science on one side. The so-called prescribed cannabis or medical cannabis industrial complex is privatizing knowledge on the other side. Mm-hmm. And everybody else as a consumer is left in the middle going, well, I only really know what's in the paper. And then you've got activists, campaigners, educators creating platforms like this, creating blogs, content, people like yourselves that are working from within the professional system that are also getting others to just try and go, well, what is this? Wait a minute, let's really have a look at this. Instead of just flying ahead and moving forward with patenting nature and creating these compounds in this whole new field of biosyntheses of cannabinoids, which is something I wanted to talk to you about, is with Delta 8, Delta 10, THCP, CBDHQ, you know, what is going on? Why all of a sudden are we going over here when we haven't fully understood what the hell is going on with the naturally occurring, most prevalent cannabinoids?
Patents.
So
that's it. It's a patent. You can put a synthetic. You are patenting. You cannot patent a natural compound. You can patent a process to produce another compound, and this is down to patents and ownership of these things. So by synthesizing them, you can own it. The plant produces itself. You can't patent a natural compound.
So you can patent the extraction process. You can patent a formulation process as well. So you can extract that, have a patent for how you extract it from the thing that's freely owned or open source in the middle, and then have a patent on the packaging, even the what's it called, the distribution method. So this is something Sativex did. So they've got a patent for cannabinoid formulation for a certain specification, THC to CBD, for an oral spray application. I think that's literally the wording of it. Go brain. That was good. That was a good one.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah. It's the fact it's an oral spray, and it's
that's why everyone else is using tinctures at the minute. So again, GW were very smart. They spent 1997 through to the day they sold themselves to Jazz, working, creating patents. And if you actually want to go do this, here's a little rabbit hole for yourselves at home, folks. Even go to your favorite search engine and just literally search GW Pharmaceutical registered patents and go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. They have to use very open language on these things. They can't hide what they're trying to do. So just really look at what it is that they've done, extract that into your own knowledge, and think about how that affects the field. There is a very interesting thing that I brought up last year that seems to have gone very quiet and no one's talking about. And that was the lawsuit by Canopy Growth Incorporate against GW Pharmaceuticals. So start of the year, during the pandemic, everyone's sort of distracted. Canopy decides to buy Spectrum Therapeutics Limited in Germany. Spectrum Therapeutics Limited own a patent on CO2 extraction of cannabinoids from raw cannabis plant material. And they got this, they owned Spectrum. As soon as they got the paperwork from Spectrum, they owned all of the patents and the intellectual property of Spectrum. The day they got this, they filed in Texas, I think it was, for a patent. I think it was Florida. They filed for a patent in the US. The day they got that patent, they filed in Texas a lawsuit against GW for the wording of their extraction process of Epidiolex on the Epidiolex website. So basically, if they can win this lawsuit or even just cut GW enough, any company, and this is the vast majority of the medical cannabis industrial complex or licensed producers, the cabal of licensed producers are using CO2 extraction for their products, are then going to be in a very interesting licensing position where they'll have to pay Canopy for the right to extract on this. GW are going to have to win this lawsuit outright, because then all they have to do, they literally have a global list of everybody, and they went, let's go GW. If GW doesn't work, they file in a different region against the second one. If that doesn't work, they file in another region against the third one. They file in another region against, and all they need is one win that they can verify under that patent, that international patent, that they can then go, everybody that's using CO2 extraction, you got to come to us. So this is what it's all about. Because as you said, it's about patents, it's about control. So we saw this in the UK campaign for years. And I'd often take flack from medical cannabis patients here in the UK saying that I don't represent them, when actually I very much feel that I have their interest at heart. I want them to be truly free. I don't want them to be beholden to a system that exploits them, that extrapolates their data, their knowledge, and that with smiling faces tells them they're doing everything they can to help them. When I'm hearing all these stories of the system failing, I've just been sent a copy of an email from a clinic that will remain nameless for legal reasons in the UK that was asking patients to pre-book and early book their Christmas supply, even though they were getting emails saying that they hadn't got their previous prescription because that was out of stock. So they were asking them to pay up for stock they didn't have. Then if we want to talk about, this is another area I'd like to talk to you about, because obviously you're a formulation chemist. The clinics, the medical cannabis, the prescribed cannabis sector in the UK are not talking about terpenes. And so I'm trying to protect patients that don't know about this, that are suddenly, I got a 22-1. And yeah, it was brilliant. For weeks, I had pain relief. I slept and my appetite was stimulated. And they go back to that clinic and they go, well, we're giving you a different 22-1. And they give a terpene that you have a reaction like my missus has, or, has a difficult reaction to it. All of a sudden, you're in a heightened state. You're not getting the same benefit. You're in a difficult position, and you don't know why. You don't understand why. You know what I mean? And it's difficult when you take a drug expecting one response and you get another. It can be very disconcerting. It can be very discombobulating and confusing, and difficult. Which I suppose leads us back to what you were saying before about testing. And it's one of the things that I think we're not going to see testing under this medical prescribed system because they don't want us to test their products. Because as I said before, the split of the community, the patients that have registered now, the majority that I know that came from cannabis that were active or knowledgeable within the industry and community now only pay that minimum prescription to the basic product. So they've got a piece of paper and a pot that they can walk around with. They grow their own, they buy from the legacy market, and they're not interested in participating because they've seen the shortcomings of it. And so it worries me that as those people leave, it's only those that are not informed that will then, yes, get some intermittent symptom relief, that will get some intermittent benefit from the plant. But because of the inconsistencies and because of their lack of knowledge around it, are then not going to get the maximum benefit of it. And then the flip side of it is contentious, agreed, but you might be able to shed some science on this: combustion over vaporization. The combustion, when it's pure, is causing a chemical reaction amongst the compounds that actually alters the makeup of some of them, that I would argue, from my very limited understanding of the science, increases the benefit.
Yeah, well, you're going to get different compounds forming. You're going to get more CBN in there. Through personal experience, vaporizing is very different to smoking. And what they can't do, and I think this is part of the legislation, is actually encourage smoking full stop. They can't be seen to be doing that. And actually on prescription, smoking is not permitted. That's just an absolute no.
That makes sense to me, that a prescribed medicine couldn't be smoking because of our connotations of tobacco smoking and them being equated to being the same thing at this point. So I think, at this point, prescribing it is not going to be a thing. But then the volume of people I know that get that prescription cannabis and roll it into a joint or smoke it in a bong is humorous.
Well, it's because they get the relief that they're looking for. It's a much higher temperature. You've got completely different changing compounds there, because, as you say, you've got a much higher temperature. So you're going to get the formation of many different compounds with that, which means you're going to get a different hit from it. a totally different hit from it. I mean, you brought up earlier that the cannabis naive that are being actually they haven't got the knowledge, so that they're being taken advantage of. What I'm actually seeing, which is worse for patients, is the knowledge which is being stolen from them by licensed producers, and actually just saying that they're about the patients, but all they're doing is coming to them, taking the information, not paying them an hourly rate, which they would pay an actual consultant to do this, when they've got all of this money. This is another side to it that I'm not liking about this legal market as well. You've also got then other consultants who have actually figured out how to actually make the money, have no idea about cannabis, going onto patient websites, taking information, turning that into a presentation, and then charging that company £1,000 for that.
Yeah, we've known for a long time that data is more valuable than oil. It is the single most valuable resource on the planet, if you want to call it such a thing. But it's only contingent upon the system that we live in currently. But yeah, it's a shit situation, I would say, because there is a lack of education or an awareness. There is the fact that they're not talking to them about cannabinoids, the fact that they're not also then talking to them about alternative ways to stimulate your endocannabinoid system. If the cannabis was a medicine and they were going to talk about it as a medicine, in my eyes, then they would truly be talking about this. You would be allowed to juice and include it into your diet. There would be conversations about fortifying grains and cereals with non-psychoactive cannabinoids, the same way we do with vitamins and minerals in most of the food sources. There would then be conversations of exercise, for example. We've known for quite a long time that runner's high is on the endocannabinoid system. We're starting to speculate that actually the endocannabinoid system has a real strong functionality in working with hormone production. So for traditionally, we've talked of neuroadrenaline, serotonin, and dopamine, thank you, as being sort of the behavioral responses behind things. But actually that system of delivery seems to be working, at least peripherally, via the endocannabinoid system. So if you're then talking about medicine, it's all well and good going, yeah, we can give you this flower that you should use at these instances, but actually what you should be doing is get up in the morning, getting some exercise. You know, if you got the opportunity to go to the shop, walk to the shop rather than drive. You know, if you can't engage in yoga, meditation, we've discovered as well, actually increases endocannabinoid production. Diet, balancing omegas 3 and 6 massively produces healthier gut bacteria, produces an increase in endocannabinoid production, as well as other peripheral health factors that basically mean that you could lower tolerance, you could lower the amount you need in. And I don't want to live in a world where I'm told what I should consume. As I said before, I want to live in a world where I make informed decisions. Yeah. I want everything to be available, even tobacco at this point. Tobacco should be available. It shouldn't have the state they're going at it now. All they're doing is meaning that you are creating a form of nightmarish existence for those that are addicted to this substance. They've got to then go by and look at these tumors, look at these horrible images, be told you will die, you are going to get cancer. Do you know what that does to the health, though? Because if you then are smoking a potential carcinogen, yes, highly potential carcinogen, but there are people out there that have smoked for 50, 60 years that never get ill. Because if your body isn't receptive to cancerous cells, you are not going to get them metastasizing and forming into tumors. We destroy and carry cancerous cells all of the goddamn time because we're exposed to cancerous elements all the time in our food, in our water, in our air. As we discussed before, we've got the C8 chemicals, BPZs, BPAs. I mean, we eat credit cards worth of plastic a week in our foods. So all of this stuff is in us. It is constantly making us sick. So then the idea that we should go and give the same system of neoliberalistic capitalism money, resource, data, and more power and influence over our lives when they have made us this sick, they have driven us to this point, when we should be able to make the informed choice. I mean, the ultimate medical application of cannabis for me is applying it as carbon sequester. It's cleaning up the soils, removing heavy metals and toxins that are then actually growing into our plants and our grains that you're then feeding to animals that you're then eating. Do you know what I mean? There are so many other ways that we could attach this. And I've argued this for a while that, yes, please save the children. Yes, please help epileptics. Yes, please help cancer patients. Yes, please help everybody you can with this. But understand that if you don't save the fucking planet, there's nowhere for us to live. And if we empower these licensed producers to pump more carbon into the atmosphere, produce more hydropetrochemicals, produce more fertilizers, produce more damage to waterways, produce all of this peripheral damage while producing a medicine, air quote medicine, to help a bespoke few, we miss the fucking point. And so I'm in a difficult position where I qualify for a medical prescription. I can't afford one, but I could by means make one happen. But I feel in my heart of hearts it would be disingenuous for me to turn my back on the generations of people that have fought before me for this knowledge to be in my head, that have stood in against police, against authorities, against governments, against armies in some cases. For me to sit on this platform, on this internet, and espouse my ideology every week, to be able to chat out this shit and to be able to find an audience that shares a commonality with this. And I can't support this system, but at the same time, I want to support the patients that are caught up within it. And I find it difficult because even now it's rattling in my head if the word naive was perhaps maybe a bit too sharp. And I don't mean it to be. I am full of compassion. Anyone that truly knows me knows that I am a loving person. It is the reason I am doing what I am doing, is to try to liberate all. And I'm struggling to figure out how to educate those individuals while pointing out the shortcomings, the cronyism, the corruption, and the exploitation that is going on at the higher levels.
You've got the other factor of some people just want an easy way. And they should have that choice to be able to do that as well. Yeah. But it be informed. So what you're doing is educating them. What you are doing is talking to them. But at the same time, some people are happy living that life. Some people are they don't want to grow their own. They don't want somebody else growing for them. They want to go through a route that they trust. And again, we need to respect that. And that's kind of where I hope I come in, is that I can help improve this prescription market, that I can actually go, hold on, and actually get the people who are doing the prescribing going, this isn't right either. So that I can sort of bridge that gap and try and improve that, because we're not going to get rid of the prescription market. It isn't going anywhere.
Nor should we. And that's what I'm struggling with, is that I feel it's a weird way of describing it, but painting myself in a wrong light. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's the expression, because I'm not against the patients or advocacy. I'm frustrated by people that then go, I'm all right, I've got mine, I'm cool. But I understand, I empathize, especially after the couple of years that we've just gone through in the world that we currently live in. I get that mentality. And I am not against you, and I'm not trying to take anything from you. Please don't think that I am. I'm trying to improve your system, and I'm trying to make it more genuine, more honest, more open and transparent, so that then we can have this acceptance that if you're okay to go to that licensed producer and buy your medication and consume it wherever you want, and now start to challenge institutions so you can bring it into venues and you can do whatever else, then I should be okay to consume cannabis therapeutically to my benefit, how I choose and fit. And actually, by incentivizing me to be allowed to grow my own, to be able to trade amongst others, that you said before about regulation. Yes, I want to see ubiquitous testing, but you've got to remember actually what we're seeing now, and we saw this from the spider mites and the molds that were exposed in GW when they were on national television, that a lot of these big boy producers, they don't understand the potential consequence of what lives and can operate in a garden. Whereas some of the best dealers, drug dealers, those dodgy, nasty guys, they know their shit. They are scientists. They have literally studied this more than, they're not a corporate that's then gone, what are the rules? Go to 0.001 of that rule. Get as close to breaking that rule as possible so we can save money. No. These guys are constantly adapting, constantly changing, constantly learning how to produce a far superior product, cleaner, safer. They're not even trading. They're giving that knowledge to others in their community. There are pockets of these people that have far better knowledge bases and ethics and morality than these licensed producers, yet they are criminals, they are gangsters, they are bad men.
However, I have seen the other side of working in grow shops over years.
Yes.
There is a dark side to that industry. Yes. There is. And we can't get away from it. And there are a lot of gangsters, and there are a lot of people not caring what they spray on their crops. So it would be naive for us to also say that all of the legacy market, all good, nice, happy people, all wanting to share and help one another. There aren't. And I have seen some sites in the shop that, it is a dark industry. I'm not going to hide. There is some dark shit that I've seen and shouldn't have seen, and other people shouldn't be exposed to that. What the answer is, there is not just one. And for me, if you're being self-sustaining, you shouldn't have to go through any checks. You shouldn't have to have a license. You shouldn't have to register it. You shouldn't have to say, this is what I'm growing. This is how much I've grown. That's your business. You do that. If you want to then start trading that, I think there should be some standards put in place. I think you've got to meet those.
Does it not then depend on what you mean by trade? If you're then going to go set up a stall and sell to the public, yeah, I agree. And that should be, so it almost should be, cannabis should be descheduled for the public and as a plant in itself. And then levels of restriction occur for usage or for sale. So then if I've got two mates that they've grown and I've grown and I've gone, wow, do you want to swap? That shouldn't require anything. No. Even if it's a case of then I've run out and I go to him and I go, all right, I'll buy one of you for 180 and you can buy one back off me. Again, that shouldn't. When it becomes then that craft industry, yes, there should be hygiene certificates. There should be basic sanitation. There should be procedures and things put in place, but the same way we do with sandwiches and food and other things, but it should be done in that sense that you get these certificates. It's not a criminal thing. It's done from the, same as like littering and stuff like that. What's that called? It's not judicial, it's civil. So it's done through civil. So it's done through fines and things like that. So you're not then facing criminalization, demonization, stigmatization for what you are doing, your actions. You are then just punished for if you get it wrong. Then whereas if you then go up to big boys and your licensed producers, and especially if you're entering the pharmaceutical industry, which is where I think medical should go, then that should be scrutinized at every level. Because we've seen, again, if you want to go watch that Dope Sick, if you want to look into the history of, not to be again too conspiratorial, companies like Pfizer, and you look at some of their previous lawsuits and what they've settled, Jesus Christ, you'll understand why I have a hesitation towards them being the only game in town. I've evolved my position over the years. I'm not against anything. We all have the right to exist within this. And I'm happy, but I will always fight if you are going to deny the existence of others, or if you're going to say that ours is all of the good stuff because we're hemp, but all of the bad stuff is these cannabis people. It's not. The criminalization, those gangs, those bad people that are involved in this, that are exploiting children and trafficking people, that are committing violent atrocities, that are committed to county lines, that are spraying products on things. I've seen glass, I've seen sand, I've seen synthetic cannabinoid receptor antagonists, I've seen all sorts of shit into this, and then I've seen again the way they've grown it with people putting all sorts into the plants and molds and all. I get that, but they are the same mentality is the same that will happen within the licensed producer. They're people looking to exploit. They don't give a shit. There's no passion, no true knowledge, and no caring to be involved in the industry. And I think that if we can truly open it up and go, all right, we're going to pursue medical, as it were, over here. We're going to pursue agricultural, low THC over here. We're going to pursue whatever over here. There is reciprocal sharing of knowledge because it's all true. Yeah. This is the thing that is disingenuous to me is they're going medical cannabis research. And no, that's cannabis research. What are you on about? Unless you've done it on a synthetic compound or a medication that you have produced through a formulation of other drugs, you've just done research on cannabis. It's the same thing. There are chemovars, or cultivars and variants of the chemovars within them that'll obviously have nuanced different changes, but ultimately the potential of the plant is then true. A terpene that is developed in one strain, when that terpene is developed in another, has at least the potential to model the same behavior. Obviously, there's interactions and synergies. Again, I'm talking like sort of chemist with all the other compounds, but you get what I'm saying, that what is true in a discovery in an Australian lab is true of an Israeli lab, of a Canadian lab, of a UK lab. And it shouldn't then be hidden and patented and creating a profit. It should be given to the people to go, we've made this new discovery. If we could all truly understand this plant, we'll get somewhere, rather than giving a few gatekeepers the legal ability to hide knowledge and to exploit people to steal it from them.
To flip that round as well is that I've experienced a lot of attack from the legacy market as well. And I think we all do need to come together and realize that we all want the same thing. We are all, I come from the patient background as well, and that side of things. So I think we need to break down this, our way is right. We're all wanting the same thing. And I think that, and that's from every kind of aspect. Not one way is right. There is not one solution to this problem. And all of them needs to be considered. Everything needs to be on the table.
Yeah, I'd say there's not one solution, but there is almost one mechanism to get us to then be able to sit and go, right, no one's going to prison right now.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? And I think this is very interesting of the States' Rights Act in America that's been leaked by Nancy Mace, South Carolina Republican representative. And basically they use my favorite word, deschedule. So they're talking about the removal of cannabis from the Misuse of Drugs Act, or the drugs regulation.
Yeah, so it's not a legalization, it's not a decriminalization.
It would be regulated the same as alcohol and tobacco. And that, to me, there's your point. That is exactly how you do it. Because then if you want to become a tobacconist and open a tobacco shop, there's not the same restrictions or limitations. You can go and do that. You know, if you then even want to set up in certain regions, smoking clubs are still allowed. I mean, you can technically have a smoking club in the UK, a tobacco smoking club. You know what I mean? That means you can get around certain smoking ban laws and things like this. You know what I mean? And then you look at how alcohol is pervasive of the different spectrum. You can go to nightclubs, you can go to the old man's working pub, play game pool quietly and throw some darts. You can go rave your tits off at a huge venue. There's that spectrum of access. And I think that by descheduling it and moving it into that, we allow the flourishment of the already existing industries, because we've got to get it right. There are coffee shops, there are clubs, and there are institutions in every country in the world. I don't care how insanely bad their laws are. There are communities and collectives of people that gather together in some small way, that share knowledge, that share cannabis, that share the culture, and that in some small way nourish that light, you know what I mean, that flame. And I think that if we deschedule it, we allow those flames to burn and collectivize, and we see it. It brings to light the dark shadows of the industry. It means that why would anybody want to exploit children if there isn't a profit motive to do so? Why would anybody want to hide knowledge if there wasn't a profit motive to do so? And so I don't buy this lie that keeping just the pharmaceutical industry involved is the best way to push innovation and research and adaptation to give patients the best products, because I don't believe that. I wrote a blog for iSmoke several years ago saying the best way to get access for medical is everyone to have access, because everyone that has come from it having previous experience got access to the legacy market. All of those people that treated cancers, all the knowledge we have around MS, all these other conditions exists because people broke the law and used illegal cannabis to treat themselves. And so that truth must be recognized, that yes, you can make more and more bespoke medications to help things like epilepsy and things like that for children, I agree, need very strict licensing and regulations and research and development, and should be allowed to exist.
Transparency of product is what they need.
Yeah, but they don't want to do that, because then if they say, oh, well, actually, we found it's this ratio of these cannabinoids plus this terpene, somebody could go at home and grow a devil's plant in their back garden and then put it down to a tincture and make it at home. And I understand that the parents' hesitance towards that and the fear of that, but if they truly understood the knowledge of the plant, they would understand there is very little harm that they could do if they grew the plant correctly, if they engaged with it. I'm not saying that they should. I'm not saying that everyone should. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that the knowledge would give the potential. It damages patents, it damages intellectual property, it damages market share, it creates competition in areas and regions they don't want. And so that's what I'm advocating for here, is that the patient's right, that if they want to go and buy and engage in that system and do that, perfectly fine. But I also want to live in a world where you don't have to have a piece of paper. You don't have to identify. You don't have to tell anybody anything. You can walk down the street with a joint and nobody says jack shit to you. They don't go, are you a medical or recreational user? Does this help? We shouldn't be classified into these arbitrary groups. I'm an advocate, as I said before, for free right to destroy ourselves, but knowledge and responsible structure of governance to inform us how to not do it. Do you know what I mean? So cars, for example, we have regulations about seatbelts, about the structure of the cars, about the fuels that can go into them, about how the roads should be presented, about the crash barriers. All of these structures are put in place so that we can potentially kill ourselves in a 2-ton metal box. When you think of how dangerous driving really is, but what have we done? It's a necessity now. It's privilege. It's a right that we're allowed to do, even though we now know of the contributions of the pollutants from combustion engines. We're now going, no, we're still going to protect that. We're going to move you to electric.
Oh, don't stop me on electric. The batteries, right, are far more damaging. How do we get rid of all the chemicals from an actual battery? I'm just going off in a different kind of direction here, but I want to bring it back to the cannabis conversation as well, just to throw something in. The concentrates that we've got now, right? Back in the 90s, we didn't have anything like what we use for dabbing. We didn't have any of the you had hashish, which would come in from various different countries, from Morocco, but the kind of, content of THC of that was sort of 15% at a push.
And they were quite high CBN because it was all sun-dried as well.
So you've got a very different kind of compound there. So the research that's been done is very different to what's now. Now, I do also worry about the effects of these chronic use of these concentrates. We don't know what the effects of overloading the actual endocannabinoid system with these regularly. So I think research needs to be done into that, and we need to not almost be naive to think that there isn't possible damage that could be being done from this, because it's not been around. It's not the same as what, was around 100 years ago with the strains that we've got. We've got very, very, very different strains. And yeah, we should have the right to be able to destroy ourselves. But then we also have to think about the people that affects around you as well.
And that's where that's where the education comes in for me. Because as I've said, it's like I could right now legally, with all rights, go to the shop, buy 3-litre bottles of vodka, sit here, down them all and kill myself. And what a tragedy. Do you know what I mean? It would be framed as, it must have been his mental health. We would never talk about alcohol being the thing that did it. And that's where I want to get with other things, is that it's about us. It's about consciousness. We can, in a well-adapted world, in a free, truly equitable, fair society, you could have heroin sold on every corner.
Well, heroin's actually less dangerous than alcohol.
Well, I know that, you know that, and we'll move on to that in a second. But my point is that you could have every single drug sold everywhere at all times. Yeah. And if with a reformed, responsible people, you would engage in it maybe here and there, but you wouldn't form these dependent relationships. Because if you look at dependencies, come from pre-existing mental health conditions, or they come from underlying socioeconomic factors. They come from something that is absent. As Johann Hari articulates beautifully, he says that the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And you see this, and they use an analogy quite well of, say, and I don't know, a grandmother breaks a leg or breaks a hip and she's in the hospital and she's getting pure diamorphine. She's getting better heroin than most people can get on the street, no matter how much they pay for it. She's sat in a room, she's comfortable, she's happy, she's got people waiting on her and everything. She's then not going to have that same relationship with it, because moving sort of forward. Whereas then it's about the habits and the way in which we consume drugs that form our relationship to them. So this is something that they noticed in the pub trade. So they started to have to try it as part of their drink aware or drink sensibly campaigns, is actually enforce the law. Because under the Licensing Act for alcohol, it is illegal to serve somebody who is intoxicated. Think about that. Think about that. Really just pause for it. It is illegal under the Alcohol Licensing Act in the United Kingdom to serve somebody who is intoxicated. Oh my! See, I've just pissed them off again because my camera's gone. There we go. So what we've done with that is then we've curated a culture with bouncers. The staff are then supposed to then cut you off. You're supposed to then go drinking with your friends, and then people will be like, "Oh, Howard, Dave, I think you've had too much. Get me a taxi. You know what I mean?" And we self-titrate. We've created an industry of then junk food. So then before you go home with all the alcohol swelling around, when you potentially pass out and die from poisoning, which is a real thing that kills a lot of people in this country, you'd be surprised how many hundreds of people die from alcohol poisoning. You then go and get fast food. You get all this crappy food on your way to the taxi, stick it in the system, you start to absorb all the alcohol, so it's still going to damage you, but it's not going to potentially be lethal. So you've created this apparatus of harm reduction around your right to get screwed up. The culture of Britain's, and you think of the damage to it, but then we put police on the high street. We do all of these other things. We're not addressing the thing because we understand that fundamentally it's wrong to deny somebody what exists, the right to be able to do it. We have to educate them into being able to do it more sensibly. So we created the unit system. We've created these education campaigns. There's now a wonderful one for Alcohol Awareness Week. I nearly slammed my brakes on when I saw it at a bus stop. This campaign, they're finally telling the truth. And I've been on this for years. Alcohol is comorbid in at least 7 types of cancer. And it was on a bus stop. And I was like, I appreciate that. And that is not to say that I'm against alcohol or alcohol consumers. It's informed consent. So when all of these people that consume alcohol are then going, you druggies and you rah, and then we can go, well, actually, the research is suggesting that THC causes apoptosis in cancer cells, that there are a myriad of conditions and symptoms that cannabis can be used to relieve, that there is an endocannabinoid system and blah, 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 blah. And we can actually have that rational conversation. But until the 12 1, 2, 12 subsidized bars in Westminster don't sell alcohol to the MPs, or at least don't allow them to be intoxicated at the pulpit, we're not going to have this rational conversation. They're not going to be able to go that you can have your little joint and go and chill if I can have my beer. It should be the same thing. I mean, Boris Johnson, Outlaw, shared a really good video on outlaw.limited on Instagram. I'm probably
on you can't add on Instagram. You can't tag him on anything.
Shadow banned. There you go.
It was the first I saw. You put Outlaw and it will not allow you to tag him on anything. The first time I saw it last night. It's
been on and off a few times. I've seen it on his page. It happens to quite a few people. It's painful piss take of shadow banning. But he put up a video of Boris Johnson in 2001 sitting there in a study going, I know some quite bourgeois types, well-to-do individuals that relax with a spliff at the end of an evening. And he said that they should be allowed to do so. That's Bojo, 2001, the guy that is now our prime minister. And it's such a corrupted, backward system. I mean, just to point out, an individual that worked within one of the reform think tanks that had conservative ideologies and connections was the political advisor for that group, then went back to work for Boris Johnson as Lord Mayor. And as far as I'm aware, is also part of advisory councils currently. That man has intimate knowledge of the cannabis industry. And what they're doing is they've taken him. He knows the truth. There's a video. He's talking the truth 20 years ago. And yet his position of his government and where he is today is to create this for-profit limited system. It is the hiding of truth. And I think that you saw it with Tony Blair, you saw it with David Cameron, you saw it with all of the prime ministers, that they then have spoken after they've come out of office. Oh, probably should, decriminalize and people shouldn't go to prison for, weed and stuff.
But I think one of the big problems, I think we've got two issues there. I think how much money will the alcohol industry lose if they allow this to happen? I mean, Professor Nutt talks about what happened in the 90s with Leah Betts and how that campaign against ecstasy was funded by the alcohol industry. And that's why it was such a big campaign. Now, if an industry can do that because they see this other drug as a threat to that industry, of course they're going to be stopping cannabis because it stops you drinking as much. You slow down massively.
It's interesting, though. That was my first thought about 18 months ago. And then I went, all right, let's test this. Let's go down some rabbit holes. And I ended up writing a blog about Morse & Co's, the manufacturer who owns Co's and quite a few other lager manufacturers, I think you call them, and beer manufacturers in America. And looking at their investments and where it was going. And this led me to find that I think it was at the time 9 of 10 of the world's largest beer manufacturing conglomerates had each invested something to the tune of $1 billion via peripheral investment vessels into cannabis. And I went, why the hell would they do this? And it was cannabis drinks. So cannabis drinks are going to be a massive part of this because then it's going to be 25 milligrams, 50 milligrams of a cannabinoid in a drink, a water soluble isolated cannabinoid. And I think what they're hedging their bets on, or hoping, I think part of the industry, is that there will be a conglomeratization between combustion consumption or vaporization combustion and drinking. So that eventually they will be able to own the infrastructure where people consume these things. So if it's then edibles and vaporizer carts and tinctures and stuff like that in the drinks, that'll be the social experience. So you go out and you'll drink your cannabis and maybe you will be able to mix it with alcohol. And yeah, they'll probably will actually find, because again, the research will probably show if you combine cannabinoids with alcohol, you probably end up reducing some of the liver damage, some of the neurological damage and the other things that come as a consequences of alcohol consumption. This isn't to be against
stop people being arseholes as well.
Behavioural adaptation, exactly. David Nutt, for example, David Nutt as part of is Drug Science, what's the other company thing that he works with? They were working on Alcosynth.
Yeah, the botanical drink that he's developed.
Yeah, so they're working on, so it would, an intoxicant like alcohol, but without the liver damage, without the destruction, a lot of the destruction of it. And that is basically going to be effectively banned under the novel psychoactive bill. Whereas I think that if that was then taken into this, that we should have drug consumption spaces, that actually if the alcohol, tobacco industries, if these sin industries, these vice industries, whatever you may want to sort of term them, they should all conglomerate together and create social space access for these things. And I think that that's where some of them are hedging their bets.
But why are we programmed that this is sin? Why is changing your state of mind a sin?
This seems to, and it's a rabbit hole I've been going down recently. I did some research a while ago. I brought this up actually with Martin Condon on the podcast recently from Martin's World, of the Catholic Church when they were forming and creating cathedrals and mega churches and whatever else. The sites that they picked, whether coincidence or intentional, were really rich in psilocybin mushrooms, liberty caps. So then there was a proclamation put out from the Vatican effectively to stop the monks consuming these mushrooms, because the Vatican had to be the only vessel to God. And I think that one sentence is what is happening here, that through the mass religiosity of the Abrahamic religions, Islam, Judaism, and the Catholic Christian traditional faiths, so there's like 2,000, 3,000 out of them, the proliferation of this idea that faith brings you to God. So the profound experience, the mysterious, the sensory altercation beyond things like sex and food are the realm of God. They are the realm of, you have to have a faith to be able to understand and be allowed to access this. Whereas then I think there were pockets of movements as we started to globalize cultures through the, let's say, the 17th, 18th century, that we started to come across cultures that didn't have church institutions. They didn't have priests in the sense that they controlled people's access. They were people that facilitated that access through ceremony, through ritual, through helping them heal, through helping them identify issues psychologically, medically, metaphysically. You know what I mean? And I think that we've been at war with that concept ever since. But what we've done is taken their medicines. So we then took tobacco. Look at what we did to tobacco. We then took things like, I can't remember the tree that it comes from, but effectively where we get aspirin, paracetamol from. The issue that we've created with that, look at the exploitation of these cultural, historical knowledge bases and how we've bastardized them. Even alcohol had ceremonial ritual use in a lot of the other cultures, whereas in the the developed Western world, we had alcohol because it was safer than water. People drank alcohol because you died from drinking water. So you fermented everything. We had ciders and all sorts of shit at varying levels, because then you'd have your day intoxicant and then your night intoxicant, you'd work your way up to your XXX moonshine for your bedtime. But yes, I think that because then we had that, we so intrinsically almost normalized in us that alcohol isn't a drug. It was a way to keep us away from that. And it was so then intrinsically built into us, the same as caffeine normalization in English and UK culture. You know what I mean? In American culture, actually, you think of what happens with what has happened with coffee. Again, what was used quite ceremonially in the regions it came from. Same with even herbs and stuff that we put on foods. We've missed a lot of the potential benefits of them, again, terpenes and other compounds within them that have potential therapeutic benefit. Yet we're just garnishing food with them. We've missed a lot of the understanding of these things. And because we've given them over to corporate entities, invested interests that have then gone, oh, well, we'll be one of the 3 people that produces ibuprofen. We'll be one of the 3 people that produces this. And it doesn't create competition. It doesn't create knowledge outside of that realm that then people can actually apply in their day-to-day lives. And I think that if we're not careful, in 50 years, very few people will know that medical cannabinoids come from cannabis. Really? What? That plant that's gone extinct. What do you mean that stuff that all those druggies are getting shot for, the firing squads? Yeah. That's literally what it feels like we're going to go towards. There's going to be a handful of us left that are like, I don't care how, even if you give us 80% of it, I'm still going to fight for the 20%. And if it's wrong and you've done it wrong and you're exploiting people, you're manipulating, you're not giving people an opportunity to rebuild their lives after decades of demonization, vilification, and prohibition, I'm going to fight that.
I hope you're wrong. I do.
I hope I'm wrong.
I really do. But I suspect, it's going to go that way. And I don't think they'll even be called cannabinoids by then because of the system the way it is. But the grassroots movement is still there. It's not gone away. They've not destroyed it. The passion is still there. There is still a lot of people, and there's a lot of people waking up to actually what I'm putting into my body is why I'm feeling like shit, why I'm getting cancer, why this is happening. And, not doing exercise is causing me more problems, and not going into nature and not just appreciating what's around us as well. I think a lot of people are waking up to that. Well, I hope they are.
I think they are, but I think it's almost in a backwards way. So people are then, GPs are prescribing nature, for example. That's an actual thing. They're also prescribing exercise, right? I
think the problem is
that a
lot of people have been programmed to think, I go to the doctor, I get a pill. If I come out of that doctor's without a pill, I am not happy. I have not achieved what I've wanted to go. That's why I've gone to that person.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that I was arguing or advocating for before is individual sovereignty, is that in a world where we are truly educated to make informed decisions, it would only be an accident or a genetic default or environmental consequence that I would need health interactions. Do you know what I mean? If we were then truly educated and we actually regulated McDonald's and Starbucks and whoever else, and we actually had the conversation about sugar, really, really had that conversation about the drug sugar, we would understand what the hell is going on here. But we're not prepared to do that. So what we do is we create proliferal industries, we create medications, we create insulin for diabetics, rather than having, again, conversations about diet, lifestyle, what is happening here. I mean, most people don't know sugar is in everything. They put ketchup. You look at the picture of how much sugar is in ketchup. You look at things that are even sour tasting, things that are bitter, things that are not sweet. They pump sugar into it. They pump different forms of the production of sucrose of it into different, the same as they do with lactose from milk. They then break it down and then inject it effectively into the product chain at all different parts where you don't know you're being exposed to it. And then as it compounds and it builds, then with a sedentary lifestyle, because you don't have time to be active because you're working 50 hours a week just to keep your roof over your head. You're stressed because you're trying to build a future for your kids. You're trying to save some money and you're buying the ready meals, you're buying the cheap food. And as you say, you're feeling shit for a couple of days. And then you're just, I'll treat myself. Because we're told to that lie, I'll treat myself, I'll grab a McDonald's, and you feel shit again for another 3 days, and I'll get this sugary drink, perked up, and then and we're just constantly riding these drug highs that are not drugs because they're not involved in this conversation, yet they're demonizing psychedelic compounds, or now they're co-opting them, of going that you shouldn't be allowed to intermittently consume these things and have profound experiences and then drastically change your life and modify how you live. You can, however, come to us and have a ketamine infusion for £6,000 and sit for an afternoon with 2 clinicians in a sanitized, hygienic room where we will control the amount of the profundity that you can have, where we can actually talk you through and make sure you don't have what they would call a psychotic experience, or what I would call the controlled psychotic experiences of the profound experience. I've had moments on LSD where I've gone, I've lost my shit, and then just gone, drugs. I'm on drugs. All I have to do now is not ring anybody, not interact with the world, not leave my house. Just sit the fuck down. Just give it a couple of hours.
But you're educated in that area.
And that's
experienced.
That's the difference. Yeah, and that's why I take that for granted. That's my privilege. But this is what I was saying about getting informed consent, that actually all of these compounds, I mean, there's a pharmaceutical company has created, is it an antagonist? What's the opposite of an antagonist? Agonist for LSD that just knocks it off the receptor. You just literally come off LSD. Do you know what I mean? That was, if you only create a market of say, you sell LSD, it comes with an agonist that reduces and stops the effect. It comes with a leaflet of what to expect, what to do in certain circumstances, how to regulate food intake or liquid and things like that, the same as you would like with MDMA. A hotline and a website and a carer's number. So if somebody's with you that's trip sitting, they can ring somebody and get advice. So they're sober, giving you legal, correct, medical, safe advice. Those systems need to be put in place. And the same, I think, is then true of cannabis, but maybe less severe, because I think it's through cultural education. So you go into the illegal cannabis community and you attend one event and you think you know all this stuff, and all of a sudden you're talking to people and you're like, indica sativa is just about the taxonomy of the plant. It's about how it grows, not the physical effects of it to my endocannabinoid system. You then learn about the different brands and the different levels of connoisseurs, and you suddenly learn all of this stuff, and it informs you moving forward. And that education comes from community. And I think the same happens in good pockets of drug education. So there are LSD communities, mushroom communities, there are forums, there are groups, organizations, and intergenerational collectives of people that share this knowledge that then protect each other. But there are unfortunately others that fall outside the remit of this. Whereas if they were able to be brought into the light, and I think the same is true of then the recreational adult consumer cannabis market, that knowledge transcends everything. So the medical applications of these compounds, they will move further with our knowledge, but it should only move further if we're allowed to do it our way as well.
But how do we deal with those who take advantage? So there was a lot with particularly psychedelic side of things. How do we deal with these 21-year-old shamans who think they know it all and then actually really fuck somebody up? I mean, you know, they don't know how to talk them through it, or they don't know what they've exactly got. And for me, drugs are not the problem. It's not knowing what you're taking and how much of it. And as you say, this regulation that we've seen come into the alcohol industry, where there are units, you can take a measurement of what kind of effect you're going to have on that. Mm-hmm. I worry also for those who will. There's a lot from. I didn't actually realize this until I went to this breaking convention. Convention. Fantastic that there are groups that come together and will take advantage of women, vulnerable women, with this kind of ritual ceremony and actually abuse them sexually as well. So how do we deal with that as well? And we need to have those mechanisms in place. There's hotlines to help people talk somebody down. You know, how do we prevent this potential damage that could happen, and the using of these drugs for bad? And it happens. We can't deny it happens.
Oh God! Anybody just go look at the history of LSD circa 1950 through to 1980s. You look at what happened with things like MK Ultra, with the what was the two-way experiment they did in, was it Philadelphia? And they got a ring of sex workers to bring in Johns, and then they spiked them with LSD. And the guy stood behind two-way mirrors and watched the interactions and everything. One-way, is it one-way mirror? The one where you can't see through from one side. And observed all of the reports of this. We saw then with various of the programs that were run out of Harvard and other educational institutions where they were basically weaponized. Then look at Charles Manson, the indoctrination of his Manson family, a loose association of individuals that he basically found traveler kids and got them all loved up and gave them a sense of community, a sense of belonging, and then was able to indoctrinate them into quite a potentially sinister worldview and them to commit violent atrocities. And so I think that the issue then isn't necessarily the tool by which he's indoctrinated them. It's the fact that he was allowed to indoctrinate them. Obviously, there's several books and some really good documentaries exposing the supposed links of Manson to the CIA and to various US senators and people that he was allegedly with a big A, trafficking some of these women too. So we know that exploitative individuals will find themselves into any sector that they can to exploit. Let's look at priests, for example, within Catholicism. Go look at the Spotlight movie. Again, another Mark Ruffalo flick, really good, worth a watch. But I think that we already have laws to prevent that. Rape is a crime. Sexual assault is a crime. Exploitation and false imprisonment, etc., are crimes. The assault, but it's then creating light for these communities so that then they shouldn't be off somewhere hiding away, being criminals, and then the space of it, the fact you've just done a drug. I may have abused you, but you're a druggie and you've broken the law, and I can then use that against you. Whereas if these are institutions that are run by, yes, there would be healthcare professionals involved, yes, there would be psychological professionals involved, but there would also be people that have learned about culture, about iconography, about even geometry and shit, to understand the profound collective experiences that people typically will have on higher end substances like this. But how you facilitate that training to not use that as cultural indoctrination from the government or state down, or you use it from individual exploitation where people then get into those positions to grope, to exploit, to manipulate. I don't know.
I think it starts with this education, and there was something on Netflix called there was a series called Adult Material, and it touched really on consent and what consent is, and it was really quite a touching that actual series of this, and it goes through, and this woman, she's in the porn industry, and
I've seen it. Yeah, keep talking about it.
She's absolutely height of a game, absolutely. And she said to her young daughter, that she put herself into this situation where she was raped, but it wasn't rape because she was having sex with him the night before. I think it's getting this education from an early age of what is actually consent, what is, acceptable behavior. And this program we have from such a young age of what is drug taking. To me, if you're hooked on your, diamorphine, that's no different to heroin. It's just a different name. It's exactly the same compound. You just get yours from a pharmaceutical company. The others have to just go onto the street to get it. It's still an addiction. It might be a different kind of relationship with it because you're not having to go about the same way of getting it. But we actually do need to address, as you mentioned, sugar. We don't even call that a drug. I know that I have a sugar addiction. 100%. And you mentioned the having a bit more sugar just to perk you up. Oh, I can get this done now. Just have a chocolate bar, right? Yeah, I can get this done now. Do it myself. Well, guilty of it. But you're not taught about that. That's a normal thing. And the normalization of alcohol consumption as well, that, okay, we talk about the binge drinking, but what about the functioning alcoholics? And the effect that they have on people's lives as well, and the normalization of that, and the difference between use and abuse as well, and that knowing what is use and what's abuse.
There's a very interesting correlation there, because a lot of people that are then functioning alcoholics that would be in a position of authority drink because of the stress of their job. Not by and large, but quite a percentage of people within, let's say, banking, legal structure, and those kind of apparatus of neoliberalistic capitalism, cocaine is involved as well. Cocaine and alcohol consumption creates cocaethylene. Cocaethylene destroys empathy effectively. We know that consecutive consumption of alcohol, so say if you're drinking moderately a few times a night, every night, you're never fully metabolized through it. And what we know from alcohol consumption is they classify it as it's a neurological retardant. It slows the processing between neurons. And the chronic impact of this, that if you start drinking at 18 and you don't stop, by the time you get 40, 50, your neurological makeup is greatly hampered massively, especially then if you've lived a sedentary lifestyle, if you've then not engaged in things that could promote natural neuroplasticity, and especially if you've then not wanted to learn new things. You've just watched your soap for 40 years. You've read your same newspaper. You've denied anything beyond your bubble of knowledge. You've actually made your brain so, not small, but the pathways so ingrained that novel and alternate thought is incredibly difficult to have. And so I think then if those are the people in government, if those are the people in high-end corporation making these decisions, they're not making empathetic, informed decisions. They're reinforcing their own worldview. They're further creating a smaller and smaller pocket of what is acceptable society. And I feel that we're moving into a dangerous phase of that at the minute with, I want to tactfully mention this, with what is going on with the vaccine status, that it's never been anybody's business about individual healthcare. We have laws to protect from employers seeking what your health history is. We're supposed to have a division between corporations, governments, and the healthcare institutions. Yet we're very quickly approaching a point of
people losing jobs because they're not.
Yeah, because even if they're not disclosing, regardless of whether it is they take up the option or not, the idea, the concept that they could be removed from society from not participating in a healthcare procedure, I think is very dangerous precedent. And the ubiquitous acceptance of that by a certain sect of society terrifies me. And I think that conformity, that coerced, manipulated conformity, is present within the medical cannabis industrial complex, as I speak of it. There are people that are either happy to continue it because they're profiting from it, or there are people that have been promised to profit from it. There are people that are invested in it and will profit from it, or there are then people that have been told they will benefit from it. And then they're all told, don't rock the boat. Just let it continue. We'll just go with it. But letting an ever smaller number of people become consultants and experts in a field they know nothing of, and they're only creating expertise around their narrow perception of the industry, means everything else is cast in the shadows.
I don't know what to respond with that.
Yeah.
We need to stop being depressing. And actually, there is a lot of positivity happening out there as well. There is. Come on. There is. This grassroots movement is coming together. You know, people are waking up to this. People are questioning it. People are saying, hold on, what's going off here? What is actually happening here? And I think we're getting pushed to the point of where people are going to start saying, hold on, this is not a society I want to live in. We can't keep moving forwards in this direction. When that will happen, I'm not quite sure of when it will. I mean, I've got relatives in France, and we here are so lucky at the moment in comparison. They need a COVID pass to be able to actually go into a restaurant. We don't have that here as yet, touch wood. So yeah, it's a society that I think is going to come out better in the end. I do feel after some time there's going to be a change, and there needs to be, like when World War II happened. After that, yes, there was a lot of poverty and there was a lot of austerity, but it moved actually to a better time. You got the 60s that came along after that point in time, and people became more free thinking. I'm hoping we're going to see that after we've had this kind of global event, but we're just in the middle of it at the moment. And I think we feel a little bit like, I can't actually see the way out of this, or where this is going, or where we're going to end up. And just because you feel you're not going to conform, or questioning, just questioning what is happening, you're being ostracized from groups of friends, and people don't want to have anything just because you're asking questions that are uncomfortable or difficult, or people don't really want to address. For me, life is about choice. It should be about choice. You should have a choice to what you put into your body. Be that, if you want to snort coke, go for it. That's crack on. That's your business. If you want to drink mass amounts of alcohol, if you want to, run up Everest, that's your business. You should have a choice. If you feel that the right way forwards is antidepressants from the doctors, that should be your choice. And that should be up to you. But as you say, it needs to be an informed choice, and not a biased kind of research done by the people producing this product. It needs to be independent, really, really independent.
Yeah, I suppose the problem is there is no truly independent bodies anymore. Everything's been conglomerated and bought up and moved into a position that everybody is invested in everything else. There are effectively 5,000 maybe families in the world that are invested into everything. Again, if you look at the Sackler family from Purdue, and that shows you how intergenerational wealth and manipulation can really work. And it's a good sort of idea as to show the potential future that we're heading in with this, which is what worries me, is the movement towards, whether you are inclined for a vaccination or not, whatever your personal and individual belief on the situation is, the idea that we have to then show papers for something is alarmist to me. And the problem I have with that is the acceptance of that is also the acceptance of a prescription, that I should have to pay somebody the right to medicate and to mitigate my own health, to manage my own health. That is redundant to me as a concept. And so I do feel a bit torn in this current system, in that I understand, empathize, and totally can see why somebody would buy into the system and get a prescription and be part of it as it stands. I get that. I do understand the fear. I've lived under it for 20 odd years now. Every time I see a blue light, every time I see a cop, every time I'm on the street, like what do I smell like? What's in my pockets? You know what I mean? I've got to think, am I wearing a cannabis emblem on my shirt? Am I, what am I sending out there? And so I can get the carrot of freedom, or I don't want to say the illusion of freedom, because I don't mean to be belittling to you. I'm not in the slightest. I'm meaning that I get it. I do get it. But if too many people go down that route alone, then when they cut off supply, when they say that, raw cannabis is got too many contaminants, there's 500 other chemical components that we just don't have the research on, and they move towards biosyntheses from CBD isolate produced by low THC or hemp manufacturing, then we're not going to have a choice. You're going to have to then go back to the legacy market, which will be more criminalized, which will be further underground, that will have most of its knowledge stolen from it, co-opted by it. So it won't be the same as it is now. Whereas if we can get everybody on all sides to advocate for the same damn thing, which is nobody should face criminal or punitive consequence for the consumption, trade, sale, or passing of cannabis unless there was some actual fault in it. So if you've then grown as a licensed producer and you've produced mold in it and then you've got sick patients, yeah, there's grounds for a class action lawsuit there. You know what I mean? There should be consequence because you are taking on responsibility by becoming at that level. Whereas there should be this standardization of education of this across the board. As we've said, that the guy growing at home that maybe sells a couple of 20 bags should know the same about the plant, enough of the basic knowledge that the licensed producers do, so they can avoid pest contamination, they can avoid using chemicals or additives that could be potentially dangerous, that they would grow it to the best of their ability.
As you say, is that freedom of education and via education? You see, I see a lot of this stuff called bro science as well, where there's misinformation within this community, where things are kind of made up. I mean, the burping, is it a burping of jars? There's absolutely no scientific backing to that at all. You've actually got more risk by keeping it opening the box up of introducing more microbes in there.
Each time during the process of the chemical, what do you call it? The chemical change process. The
decarboxylation or the oxidization.
Yeah, there's a word for it where one chemical moves to another chemical. What's it called? Reaction. Thank you.
I was thinking you weren't thinking for a really kind of...
I was going for just the base word. I was really trying to simplify that one actually there, because I realized the language we sometimes use, I'm thinking of my audience here, has maybe been a bit high end. So I think we'll maybe speak in a bit more layman language for the next sort of few questions, if I can keep you for a little bit longer, if that's all right. I wanted to ask you about... where is the question? Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. This is, again, contentious, and you can choose to not answer this, and I would understand why. If you were to then look at the arbitrary collection of low THC cultivars that are classified as hemp in the UK, do they exist scientifically? Do they exist beyond legislation? Like, is there a subgroup for what is termed hemp?
No, not really. It is basically legislated. It is what is on the European hemp list of. It's just basically a list. There is no. They tend to be more straggly, so they tend to be a lot more for fibre. So they tend to be the actual anatomy of the plant tends to be different. So it's more for the fibrous contents, and that's just on for the actual, what is the word I'm looking for? Functionality of it. So because they're producing hemp for paper or for biomass, they're more interested in that. They're not interested in the flower at all. They're more interested in the actual stalks because it's got the lignin in that they're actually wanting. But actually scientifically, no, there isn't. There tends to be lower contents of cannabinoids, but hemp itself has been sort of invented as this legalization of growing cannabis back in the day. I think it's outdated now, this terminology, hemp, personally. I think it's all cannabis. People tend to grow male and female, though, with hemp. So it doesn't matter. They just chug it in a field and will then just harvest that for the purpose of what they want it. It's not for the flowers, but we should be allowed to use those same varieties to harvest the flowers and do something with the flowers. And that's what needs to actually sort of change as well. The processing of the flower needs to be allowed.
Yeah. So the UK, it's weird. For anyone of my many international listeners, shout out to all, I think 35 countries we're up to now, getting downloaded in. So big up all my international audience. In the UK, hemp or low THC cannabis is classified as 0.2%. And the licensing you get for that, I think there is somewhere in the region of 50 to 100 hemp licenses, something like that, last time I checked. Majority still for research. But then the license itself means you can't extract from
hemp. You can't do research on hemp. You cannot get a hemp research license. It has to be from a commercial use. So in order, because this was something when years ago, I was applying for a license by the university. We were looking at different ones. We weren't interested in anything over 0.2% THC. We weren't interested in that. You could not, when I was speaking to the Home Office, you could not get a hemp license for research. A hemp license you had to have a commercial customer. So you already had to know what you were going to do with the fiber, what you were going to do with what you were producing. So you could not do research on hemp. You had to get a cannabis license in order to do research on hemp.
Interesting. So okay.
Because they were cheaper. It was half the price for a hemp license.
Yeah. So again, what are they trying to do there? But even in the commercial application of that license, as I was saying before, that you're not allowed to sell any product that is extracted or made from the flowers or the leaves even, which is incredibly ridiculous. You think of the laborious task of having to separate those materials to then do it when you could have processing to be able to create products from each step of the deconstruction, as it were, of the plant through processing. And it's deeply frustrating because as far as my knowledge base, obviously I'm not a formulation chemist, goes with this, the cannabinoids and the terpenes that are developed, for all they are in much minute ratios, and actually in most of the Western low THC hemp strain cultivars, it's predominantly CBD high, THC low, whereas the Eastern European, the Asian sort of peninsula region areas of what they would consider hemp have a higher THC to CBD ratio, but it expresses in the fibrous long, what we would consider it to be cannabis sativa under the classification of cannabis sativa L plants. But the chemical components of them, the cannabinoids and terpenes, are the same that would come off a cannabis plant produced over the arbitrary limit.
Yeah, and it's just literally a license and a list of plants. It's a list of regulated plants that they will classify as hemp, that you can then get that license to grow. The hemp license, which is cheaper to grow, has to be off of that list of European cultivars.
Yeah. Interesting. So does that then mean that companies that are saying that we extract our cannabinoids from hemp are effectively advertising the fact that they don't support cannabis? Because it's not then, if there's no real difference between it, if they're proudly proclaiming hemp and they're backing just the hemp industry and not talking about the fact that it is cannabis, it kind of, so it's not the science. The science isn't any different. A hemp cannabinoid product versus a cannabis cannabinoid product created to the same formulation would be the same product.
Correct. Yeah. So if you had two strains of cannabis that had exactly the same THC CBD, that below the 0.2%, but it wasn't on that list, it's not classified as hemp. Now, in the US, it's a little bit different, because I know there's many companies will call it hemp, and I think it's all about perception. That word hemp is a perception that it isn't as bad. Again, back to diamorphine and heroin. You hear the word heroin, you instantly think of a dirty junkie. You instantly think of somebody who is robbing grannies and is sitting in a pool of their own, the mess. That's what you think of. They're identical. It's just a brand name. Heroin is a brand name, and that's it. And it's been put over to this dirty side of things. It's exactly the same as diamorphine. That's what it is. And this is the same with hemp and cannabis. This perception. I remember years and years ago, Body Shop, they did a whole hemp range. It was a hemp range.
They covered the full fucking window with leaves as well. And it was quite funny because actually, if I remember correctly, they used indica leaves.
Big, fat, yeah. No, but it was hemp. Hemp, it's okay. It's hemp.
Yeah. And it feels very much like part of the gentrifying, the whitewashing, the erasure of cannabis culture and history. Do you know what I mean? And you see it all the time. I know I'm constantly, because we know this icon. When you're a part of this community or this industry, you have a passion for it. You know it. So I'm walking down a supermarket aisle and going, what's this? Shampoo? Conditioner? What's that? Pet food? What's that? It's like, You guys are doing all of this and you're advertising it as hemp and you're all saying it's safe and it's fine and it's nice. And in America, the connotation that I have is hemp is your urban white farmer that has moved over from his other agricultural crops and is diversifying and is rebuilding community and is, completely ignoring the injustice. It feels like a form of racism. I can't help but feel it is a form of classism and racism that you are going, we're not druggies in that subclass. And those people that have to deal drugs and be violent to survive and get through the systems that we've created through our voting and creation of our leadership and the systems that we choose to operate under. It's a complete cognitive bias and dissonance that they separate these things. And I've spoken again, not against, because I think that's the wrong way to describe it. I have spoken out when I've seen people speak on stages of this and watched people do this and speak of their interests and their perception being hemp and positive and good and will save the world, and cannabis being this dangerous drug and this culture that's holding us back. And they're trying to create this separation, as you said, this rebranding, this perception marketing advertising trick that we're seeing. And if you obviously know the history of Bernard Hayes, I think can't pull his name out of my head, Freud's cousin, basically, who created advertising and who made bacon a thing. So they took one of the worst parts of an animal that nobody ate. There was a cheap chuck off to then be the essential part of a morning breakfast. Do you know what I mean? And so they've used those kind of manipulation tricks are now present within this. So it is most governmental policies on this is more propaganda and marketing than it is actual evidence-based policies to protect anybody. It's to protect financial interests, social status quos. And I feel that now what they're doing with hemp is they're placating us. They've created his prescribed cannabis, here's a wellness industry, here's a sports industry even, here's now an agricultural industry. And they go, right, if you say the right words and you play the game, you can go and be here. Yeah. But don't say the C word. No. You're from this. You didn't go. And as long as you sing from that hymn sheet and you play that game and you stand on meetings and you, on stages, you use your accreditation to support their business interests, you'll continue to succeed and go up. And all that's doing is creating these ring-fenced legal pockets where it's pay to play and it's classist and it's elitist. Look at what happened in America during COVID. I broke down these statistics in a blog recently, one of the last weeks in Weed. And female participation as in women ownership and participation fell by half in 2020. Minority participation, I think, went from somewhere in the region of 34% down to 13%. Because it's conglomerization, because then they're bringing in other business interests, guys that are venture capitalists, people that have come from law, that have come from banking, that have come from big sectors, and moving in and bringing their pomposity, their arrogance, their connections and networks to further rape and destroy, or in their eyes, build an industry without understanding the culture and the community and the literal bodies they are building this on.
I think for me, hemp, how I classify hemp, is it's end use. It's all about, that is for materials. That is for not human consumption as such. It is about, it's more for bedding, animal bedding, carbon sequestering as well, biofortification of the land. That's, in my head, that's what it's about. And in some ways, if you're doing biofortification, surely we need to give that a different name so we know that that should not be consumed by humans, so that we know that it shouldn't. So maybe we do need to keep this terminology hemp, but we need to redefine it.
Actively define it, because I pointed out recently somewhere, I'm not going to state, but yeah, I pointed out publicly somewhere to somebody speaking on stage that sat in the UK, hemp is the arbitrary collection of the accepted cultivars of 0.2% low THC cannabis. You're stood in Switzerland is 1%. You're stood in Italy at 0.6%. So there is no universally accepted definition of it. In the same way we currently, so we have marijuana, we have medical cannabis, we have hemp, and even CBD is being loosely used as a word to describe good cannabis.
No, it is. It's a whole. CBD is a whole. It's the rebranding of it, but it's an isolate. So to me, that is an entity on its own, and that does need, for me, a lot more research because of. Again, it's an isolated compounds. We do not know what the oversupply of an isolated compound will do to the endocannabinoid system.
there's a lot to be concerned there. So when the hemp farming bill, for example, went through in America, we already had when the CBD revolution kicked off, people went, hemp farms, right? We get a hemp farm, we get in nice and easy. We don't have to pretend we're cannabis, but then we can make it a brand that's got a cannabis leaf on and say we're cannabis and almost manipulate and represent ourselves falsely in the community as we're for you guys. And so is that kind of built and monopolized. They've now created this isolated thing that it is a separate entity, that they don't care how it derives. They want to be separate from cannabis. They know we're not cannabis. We don't care about the fight for that in the legislation. We're legal and all right. We've got our avenue to exploit. And the consequence of that with the hemp farming bill in America has meant literal tons of CBD isolate. So what are they doing? They're putting it in everything they can goddamn think of, but they've also learned about biosyntheses, that you can quite easily, with a reactant acid and time, basically turn CBD into any of the isomers of THC. In fact, with quite basic chemistry, from I don't understand it because I've never looked at it, but from people like yourself who informed me of it being quite basic chemistry, you can modulate this into most of the derivable cannabinoids. So we're now seeing the consequence of those same people branding Delta 10, Delta 8 THC as safer because they're less psychoactive. As we have no research on these things. We don't know what's happening, but because it's from a hemp farm, the perception again is that these are safe. Whereas the dangerous THC that we've known for centuries has never killed anybody ever.
But as I call him, the bad boy, with my molecules of the week, he's the bad boy. And we address everyone else, the CBD is the good girl, younger sister who everybody wants to be friends with and and it's okay, let's celebrate her. But we're going to look at him as being the bad boy and he's not, and these Delta 8s are worrying me, honestly, because the plant only produce minute amounts. We are exposed to them, but again, we're not exposed to them in the same kind of levels of what we're producing these cartridges in.
And not the protection of the synergy of the rest of the plant. This is my issue against even rebuilt broad spectrum products where you take cannabinoids and terpenes and put them back together in a formulation.
I'm glad you brought that term up, broad spectrum.
Yeah, you've taken, and again, broad spectrum only came in the UK when they clarified the 0.2%. So for about 2 years, the cannabis regulators and the trade bodies and the various individuals were not supporting, but tacitly allowing a rumor to go around that you were safe entirely as long as your product didn't contain more than 0.2% THC, which was a massive misrepresentation of the law and got a lot of people in some quite dangerous positions and got people raided, arrested, and people are still facing charges as we speak. And so then the consequence of that went, if we go broad spectrum, so then people went, okay, well, most people set the illusion that they were just removing THC. There was a full cannabis plant extract, it was the full plant, and then we just took THC out of it and it's fine. But then a lot of the players started going, well, wait, we know we can produce CBG at a faster rate than CBD because of the molecular process of it. It is the first branch cannabinoid and we can harvest it a hell of a lot quicker. They then discovered biosyntheses, like I said. So they then were going, actually, all we need is the first compound. We just need a CBG crop or a CBD crop. Then we modulate it into the other compounds, add the compounds together, stick a food terpene in it, and boom, there you go. There's a broad spectrum cannabis product. That's the best thing you'll get on the market.
Can you tell me what you know is because I've had this conversation, Matt Hughes, who you've had on the show from Medcan Sport, we've had this conversation amount of times. What is the actual definition of broad spectrum? Because everybody comes back with something slightly different and everyone's very confused. We know what full plant extract is. That is warts and all. That's everything in there. We know what an isolate is. It's an individual compound on its own. And then you've got this stuff in the middle. So you've got the broad spectrum. Is that isolated compounds all mixed up together? And as you say, some other terpenes thrown in there. Is that broad spectrum? Or is it broad spectrum that it's, full spectrum that's just had the THC removed? I don't fully know what this definition is, and I think I don't like this term broad spectrum because I think it's so ambiguous. It doesn't tell you what it is. If it has an isolate in there, it should be stated there is an isolate in there, so you again can make that informed decision that I'm going to consume something that's got an isolate that's been processed in, just like sugar. Is it natural sugars that you've got in there, or have they put sucrose in there, or have they put artificial sugars in there? It's an informed decision, and I really don't like this terminology broad spectrum. It's not descriptive of what it is, and it is not telling me what I'm consuming.
Yeah, this brings us on to, I suppose, quite an interesting point of something I'm trying to raise at the minute, which is from the research that I have done, if you create any product for end commercialization and sale on a UK market, I haven't checked about European legislation because, frankly, we're not in EU anymore, unfortunately. Just air my politics. There you go, folks. I wish we were still part of the EU, but we're not going to get onto that one. Leave your comments below if you want to have a conversation about that. But yeah, so the regulations state that if you create a botanical an extract that is from a botanical source, the botanical origins has to be labeled on the product. Mm-hmm. And as part of the labeling standard, it has to be itemized, and it has to be its accepted universal nomenclature, which for cannabis is Cannabis sativa L. It's Latin universal name for the collection of the subcultivars of Cannabis sativa, Cannabis indica, and Cannabis ruderalis. So these companies that are not representing that, even they put it on cannabidol, just literally the word cannabidol, that doesn't tell you shit. What if is that a synthetic? Is it a biosynthesis product? Is it an isolated product? Is it a cannabinol oil that's a full plant, as it were? You know what I mean? And so it feels to me that broad spectrum is a bridge term between what we want or what a lot of people feel they want, which is the full plant, warts and all, because we know, like, obviously smoking chlorophyll, bad for you. Ingestion of chlorophyll probably has some good benefit. The other proliferal compounds as well seem to, we don't have any evidence base to suggest that they have a negative impact, but we also seem to have a casual link potentially between what happens when you take the products in isolation versus the products in full spectrum. So there is an increase in efficacy. There seems to be an improvement of proliferal systems. So that you could extrapolate back that it's being more effective to the endocannabinoid system if it's having more effect on other systems. And yes, so it feels like until they figure out how they have to write what the product contains, we're not going to get that informed decision, because it feels like that broad spectrum term was created to avoid, like I said, getting caught up in, oh, you've got THC in your product. And because everyone saw the FSA thing coming, the Food Safety Authority in the UK coming to regulate it, and novel foods and all of this stuff, they wanted to get to zero THC. The only way to naturally you can't get really to zero THC. So they had to then start either creating, and I've heard a few rumors, but I've never seen any direct paperwork, of patented processes of THC extraction and isolation from FECO, full extract cannabis oil. I haven't seen anybody advertise that as a product on the market. I have, however, seen, obviously, this very loose term of broad spectrum, which to my understanding is a carrier oil, usually either hemp seed or low THC cannabis seed oil, or MCT, which I think is a preferable oil personally because of the construct of the chains and the way that it passes the brain, etc. Olive oil, similar structure, or even peanut oil, those kind of things, depending on the chemical structure of it. And then the isolated compounds. Then they've started, some of them have gone, oh, we'll throw terpenes into this. But the extraction of cannabinoid terpenes is still a very expensive process and is still not really utilized by CBD in these markets because they can't get the margins. They're only just coming to fruition in the legal markets that are some of them getting toward a decade of legality, you know?
Well, very few actual food terpenes are actually extracted from plants. The plants don't produce enough for warrant extraction. Actual synthesis is far cheaper. It's far more cost effective.
What are they synthesized from?
Or the terpenes. So you can actually, as well, terpenes, you can actually produce cannabinoids from. Produce cannabinoids from. You can get them through the steps if you've got the correct enzymes in order to do that. Both terpenes and cannabinoids come from the same metabolic pathway. Now, I can't tell it off the top of my head. I'm going to do a bit of a plug here. If you get the recent advances in cannabis science, I did chapter 1, cultivation, stress techniques, and the production of secondary metabolites in cannabis sativa. It actually talks about these pathways and that terpenes and cannabinoids are produced in the same metabolic pathway. As I say, I don't remember things like this as part of what George does to me. He doesn't allow me to remember to recall things as quickly as I could. But flavonoids are a completely different metabolic pathway, different metabolic pathway. They are produced within the actual leaves of the actual plant, not within the trichomes. They're produced within the leaves and are as an oxidative stress response to the plant's exposure to abiotic or biotic stress. So the two very different pathways that they're being produced. The synthesis, going back to actually being able to synthesize a lot of these terpenes, it is from base terpenes they can produce them from, or it's I can't remember it off the top of my head. It comes way before your CBD gets produced, and it's where it splits off into your terpenes being produced and your actual cannabinoids get produced. So they can be synthesized from there, but there's very few of those kind of terpenes that you find in washing powders, things like that, in fragrances, are all actually artificially synthesized. And very few actually get extracted from plants.
So I guess the legislation there would then limit them because they're not for consumption. So if they're not for consumption, I imagine we don't have much research about what the hell is going on there. So this then makes me quite alarmed by the vape industry. Mm-hmm. The lack of regulation there, and actually what we're seeing now with contracts. I mean, the UK became the first country in the world recently to basically we're going to be prescribing vaporization. So we're going to be prescribing vaping to quit smoking, which is something that we hadn't done sort of previously. There was nicotine replacement with patches, with gums, things like that. There were different organizations you could grow, whatever. And there would be tacit sort of support from NHS staff towards all. Vaporization is safer sort of jobby. But it's still a continuation of maintenance on nicotine as a drug, ultimately. But yeah, so if we become that, then you've got things like Cannabis that moved in the UK. They were one of the first to get on the London Stock Exchange, and they have created a cartridge model for delivery system for cannabinoids for medical cannabis patients. So yeah, I can see issues coming here because then the regulation of the carts becomes the structure of it. Like you say, they'll regulate what becomes the broad spectrum, but not the components that go into it, because then it's in-house technology, it's proprietary intellectual property. Why would a regulator ever be allowed to see that? And so the more we moved away from the plant and being able to just put a microscope on it, or even a jeweler's scope, and look at it and understand it, to these abstract concepts and ideas and novel cannabinoids and compounds, like, scare me, really. Yeah, they alarm me, to be honest.
It is alarming what's happening, but as long as we keep talking, we keep actually bringing back up the grassroots movement so that it's never forgot. That, you know, what we had back 20 years is never forgot, and how it's got here, and that's what we've got to keep doing, is talking about it. I mean, something that not disturbed me, I didn't quite understand. So in Bristol, at the beginning of actually the pandemic, there was the pulling down of all of these statues. Now, I don't agree with what the people that the statues were put there, but we can't pull them down and forget history and what happened. Because if we forget it, how do we learn from it? How do we, if we just remove it from history and throw it into the river, you know, 3 generations ahead will never know that person existed and the atrocities that they did. So we can prevent it happening again. So we've got to keep talking about the past, not, get hung up on it, but we can't forget about it and learn from that as well. And what you do is important. And what we're doing is discussing this is important. And I think we've also all got to learn so that we're not always going to agree on things. We're not always but we've got to learn to agree to disagree.
Disagree amicably and respectfully, because even if we're disagreeing on one subject, every bloody other thing we're agreeing with, or we still have far more in common. And I agree with this erasure of history, that those statues should be removed and replaced with statues that instead of celebrating some slave trader and him building of the town, it should commemorate those that suffered in the building of the town. We don't stop looking at our history. We should constantly reevaluate it in our own personal lives, in our professional lives, in our cultural position within our society, in our communities, and in a context of global history. And those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat the same mistakes in the future. And I feel that we're living through quite a few of those mistakes with what we're seeing with cannabis, is that we're not seeing legalization. We're not seeing an end of the war. We're seeing Prohibition 2.0, the creation of monopolies, the creation of intergenerational wealth that will set up monopolies for generations to come, that we will be subservient to, that we may be able to smoke our bit of weed and go to weed shops and go to all of this, but we will never be able to own the shares, the assets, the value, and participate on a meaningful level where our voices are truly heard beyond that of the consumer. And I think that we have an important obligation as anyone that has come from the legacy market to now, because you've got to remember, we're 3 years into the law change in the UK. So there are thousands of people that have all of a sudden come to cannabis that are now legal people that are learning, but they're only learning from the mainstream institutions. They're reading the new history. They're being indoctrinated into the new narrative of what it is of cannabis, that, oh, well, actually, we only discovered the system in 91 and that this led to this, and only the scientific or the component parts of it that are relevant for them to create products to sell to the consumer, not informing them of the subject and the wider application of it, or more importantly, the history of how the history of prohibition has led to climate change, has led to us eating a credit card's worth of plastic a week, has led to battery technology that means that we are killing children in lithium mines around the world, that we are having generational warfare for resource limitation that doesn't need to exist with things like cannabis. Yeah. And once we truly recognize that, we're not gonna build a system that I'm sat here at 50 going, well, we can still do better.
Well, I think we will always say we can still do better. Right. You have a passion for what is right. And I think even if they completely and utterly legalized everything, I think you would be fighting for something else, because that is within your nature. I didn't believe in God. No, I don't believe in a God and an entity that is controlling us and makes this choice. However, I believe that people have destiny, and I believe people are put here for a particular reason, and you bump into people and you're exposed to certain people for a reason. I think that there is a certain, why do you have the passion you have, and why do you fight for this? You're not highly educated in the sense of you've got all these qualifications to your name. You didn't go to a private school. You wasn't born into privilege in that sense. So you wasn't given that destiny in that sense, but yet you're still striving for change and you're making a difference. So
I'd like to think so.
You are, definitely. Don't just take a moment to look at all the people you've influenced, and take a moment to actually how you've influenced and changed my kind of perspective on things as well. I mean, 3 years ago when the change of law came, I was like, yes, I don't have to hide anymore. Yes, things are going to get better. And in the last 3 years, I've gone, what the actual is going off here? What am I buying into here? Do I want to give my knowledge away? Do I want to give all this kind of information I've got in here to these people who will just rape it and then use it to make mass amounts of money? Do I want to do that? And that sounds very selfish in that sense. And I love helping people, and I will help patients to the nth degree, and anybody who wants advice on that. But I do worry about what I'm seeing happening with the psychedelic scene, particularly. That really does worry me more, because it's happening, and I think they're going to make more money out of that and really bastardize that even more, because you can make those synthetics far, far easier. And then actually, as you say, those ones that are therapeutic. I mean, we spoke about this earlier, that we've both experienced pills over the years that have been very different, but we've all been told it's just ecstasy. And some that have a profound effect on the way of thinking. Others, you do nothing and you just feel really agitated, and then for about 3 weeks you wish you'd not done that, and kind of thing.
Yeah, it is scary, because I think that this is going to sound, again, controversial. Bad trips don't exist. I think bad trips are the conscious state of ego, the sense of identity that we build to deal with the perception our perception of reality. So to limit sensory input from light, from thermal, they say we have 5 senses. We don't. We have somewhere in the region like 20 something, if you include all of the different peripheral mechanisms, and they're just the ones we know about. Then when you take these compounds, all of these things just suddenly light up, and everything, and you are suddenly so aware of what it is to be. And the systems don't matter in those moments. You understand, or you can contemplate religion, you can contemplate the political structures, you can contemplate societal structures, you can look at these things in such a sense of abstract that you can have these profound revelatory ideas and concepts that carry through, and they can lead to serious societal changes. Look at Francis Crick attributes the imagining of the double helix shape within DNA to an LSD experience. You have people like Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, dangerous name, currently, say that LSD experiences were one of the most profound and informative experiences of their lives. I fear that these clinics are going to create compounds that don't allow for that profundity, that don't allow for that, because those people change the course of history, whether for good or bad. Do you know what I mean? And there's probably thousands more examples of people who didn't voice that publicly. You know what I mean? If you look at Timothy O'Leary's generation and what sort of Ken Kesey and crew did with the acid tests on the Further bus, and everything that happened with that generational movement of how many people were exposed to LSD and the conceptual changes we went through. You think of how fast and hard society has changed from the 50s in the way of button down and everything being proper and prim, and everyone spoke to each other with certain etiquette and a certain normalcy, and everything just exploded into the acceptance of creativity, of the weird and wonderful, of the beautiful diversity that is the human experience. And we're still fighting to get that acceptance. And I feel that if we give up these compounds and these things, these cultural rites of passage of going and picking mushrooms with your friends and making a tea round a campfire, going to a free party with and taking pills and meeting people from other cultures and races and ideas and concepts and sharing all of these things, that will hamper and harm our development. That, yeah, you may have stopped the neurological problem of depression, that you may have reignited certain neurological pathways and dealt with, I can't think how to discuss the science on that bit, so I'm going to kind of ignore that. That you are then sort of, you are clearing the brain out, but you are not then replacing it with these new profound narratives. You are not giving yourself this new myth, the new narrative that you live by. I, once a year at least, will reset my brain hard with LSD. And what I'm doing there is basically looking at my narrative of the year. I'm going, who have I become this year? What have I allowed myself to do? What have I consciously chosen? What have I just accepted?
Can I ask why you choose a synthetic over psilocybin, a natural? Why LSD?
I have a non-neurotypical makeup in terms of my neurology. I've obviously been in and out of systems most of my life and have become quite acceptant of the fact that I'm non-neurotypical. I get that. Mushrooms for me give me a sense of deep connection and of love and acceptance and oneness with society and reality. But whereas what I find with LSD is the chaotic nature of it allows me to almost I suffer from a small form of synesthesia anyway, of like not hallucinations, but a form of like a real prolific imagery. So it's internalized. It's not an externalized thing. And then utilizing LSD, especially at high dose, it kind of tunes me into that more. And I find that that's where my creativity lies. So when you see it, when I'm talking on a podcast or whatever, and I'm doing that, there's something here. It's not augmented in my reality, but I am tuning into something in my brain where it's such a visceral thing that I can see myself scrolling through a web page and looking at a sentence and pulling a piece of data back. So in those moments with LSD, the chaotic nature of it and it almost puts me in a childlike state of just radical acceptance of the world, that fuck me, yeah, the walls are melting and gravity doesn't exist. Or, you know, I was told this anecdote about the Austin Powers evening where I woke up vegan the next day because of how profound the experience was. Knowing that I was safe in those environments and I could choose to accept that, I was able to explore my consciousness in a way that to others would potentially seem dangerous, but to myself seemed, and I deem, necessary to evolve into the next level of myself, to not get comfortable with myself, to then revisit trauma. I mean, I can do it with MDMA, you can take MDMA and actually then talk about things and be all cuddly and nice. And yeah, that's one thing, but it's good to stare into the abyss. I think it's good to be able to face one's own darkness, to be able to to manifest that. And LSD is a very double-edged sword and a very fickle mistress by the nature of her. But I think that for me personally, creating those experiences through setting and intention, I can blow myself up in a way that I know that I can repair myself. And through that repairing sets me on that next path. Do you know what I mean? Whereas mushrooms, I feel I top myself up with mushrooms throughout the year. So I'll then, like, me and the missus around a fire or something, I'll go camping or go to the woods, so there'll be that intentional thing of it. But that's usually more to treat an underlying malingering kind of apathy or that disconnect. Whereas I utilize LSD to kind of, it's been a year, I only get a handful, effectively what feels like a handful of these, you know what I mean? And with each time less. So it's just so I can revisit in a meta sense, in a very messy, synesthetic way, my life, and think in the concepts beyond language, thinking ideas and things that then I feel help inform my next steps in this. And I think that's part of what led me to a podcast, part of what led me into activism in general, and what led me into the cannabis clubs and into advocating wider human rights now and trying to figure out my place in the wider world is from these deliberately, potentially, I don't want to say harmful, but everything's potentially harmful ultimately, but the potentially chaotic and difficult experiences. But I have ultimate trust and faith in myself because of the life I have lived. I was actually very badly abused as a child, was removed from mainstream education, was in some quite awful institutions. And I've lived a spectrum of humanity. And because of my experiences and because of, I think, the unique nature of my neurological makeup, it kind of works almost paradoxically the same way you give an ADHD child Ritalin. You give somebody else amphetamine, they're going to go through the roof, whereas it'll settle them down. I think there's something to the structure of it that at the height of the experience, I can visit myself, sit with myself in a way that I can't in any other way.
It's just interesting to that you pick LSD as opposed to a naturally derived compound, like going to eating ergot, because that's where LSD comes from. I wouldn't like to actually chew on that. It's not something at all I'd sort of want to encourage.
It'd be interesting to have the natural, but I would agree, it would be very interesting to compare the natural thing of it, because what synthetic compounds, for whatever reason, seem to me to have more of a correlation towards geometric shapes.
Right. I've not done a lot of LSD at all. I've only a very small amounts on a really microdose of LSD, so I can't really comment much on LSD at all. I've done a lot of mushrooms, lots of various different ones, and very different kind of experiences with those. I mean, I saw an interesting meme for want of a thing to actually reference is that let's spike the tea with some LSD and see who's actually got their shit together. Because generally when you're talking about that bad trip, it is an underlying thing that is coming up. But
a bad trip, it's still done with intention. You've chosen to go into that experience. I am adamantly and vehemently. It's one of the things that really pissed me off when I was learning about the history of like Timothy Leary and Ram Dass and Richard Alpert and what was going on around there, and all of this stuff of the arguments and conversations and serious debates that were going on in a philosophical setting about whether to spike mass populations. And from someone who was taking a lot of drugs and because of the nature of prohibition has ended up taking things like PCP in bombs and ended up in some very difficult states and had to try exactly that. So
that's serious shit.
Yeah, going in one way and then ending up in a different situation. It's all well and good saying to yourself, this is a drug experience. But if you've gone into, like I've done most compounds probably 100 plus times, the ones that I've enjoyed honeymoon periods, we'll say of. And there's a spectrum of what I can expect of the experience, but it's still within the parameters of that. I know the physiological feelings. I know what kind of the thought processes and how that's going to feel. I know what to expect in the certain ways that I can map that experience. But then as soon as you have these left turns, these right turns on these drugs, because they are not the compound you thought they were, it feels like psychosis. You feel like, and again, you drop into that state of these things allow you into the, as call it, like conscious alignment. So Freud said you had your ego, your superego, and your id. I describe it as like your head, your heart, and your hara. So your base instinct, your emotional center, and your neurological linguistical processing center. So where you create communication and abstract ideas. And when those are in alignment and you break in a point like that with a drug or a substance, those things can start to fall out of alignment. And your instinct is like, I'm going to die. You know, this is wrong. Your brain's going, but it should have been this, and then you haven't done emotive responses. And this causes a cacophonous car crash within you of sensory data and input that you can't figure out, that is very difficult to deal with. Even if somebody tells you you have taken this other drug, you're still stuck in all of these other states of fractured consciousness. And so I think that drug consumption has to be an informed decision. It has to be never coerced, never peer pressure, never anything. If you've got to pass someone a joint and they say no, that's fucking fine. Exactly. You don't then bully them, berate them. Why are you not cool enough to do this? Why don't you choose to do this? Maybe, be curious and ask, I'm just curious, like, why do you not? And then engage in a respectful, meaningful conversation and learn more from that situation and be empathetic and understand that drugs are not for everyone. That's not what I'm ever advocating, but I'm advocating for everyone's right that if they choose to be able to safely consume anything.
I could not anymore. You know, what you're saying there is exactly that. I am very against spiking, very, very, very. It's with that statement I made, but it made me chuckle in the fact that it actually was resonating on the fact of why a bad trip may occur, why somebody has a bad experience, because you're actually facing shadows. You're actually facing something deep inside you, which you have buried so deeply and not wanted to deal with, that it pulls this out and forces you to deal with that. And you don't want to deal with it, and you fight with not dealing with that. And nobody should be forced into doing it. And it's this respect, again, with that, the alcohol thing as well, of respecting that somebody doesn't want to drink. You shouldn't have to justify why you don't want to, because you don't. That's fine to not want to. I don't want to drink. I don't want to do that. I don't want to have a smoke. You shouldn't feel that need. And I think for me, this is something that you know, going into my 40s, I'm 41 now, as I've realised that I don't have to explain why I don't want to do things. It's up to me why I want to do them. It's my reason, and nobody has to have a reason why I don't want to do that. That's my choice. And that choice, again, is back to it, and the justification we shouldn't have to do.
But it's also around linguistics, I think, because it's the way in which they go, if you go, and I've done it. So I'm like I like to play pool, so I go to a pub and maybe not have a drink, and because I don't really drink anymore. And people are like, "Oh, Simpa, I haven't seen you in ages. Up and buy a pint." I'm like, "No, I'm all right, mate. I'll have a water or orange juice or something." You know what I mean? And I'm like, what? And it's that reaction that immediately shuts down discourse and conversation. Whereas if they're like, "Oh, you quit drinking, you stop, you're cutting down," or in some way showing that their response is a curiosity, their reaction of going, "What?" That's curious. They have information and a response they weren't expecting. So, sorry, an absence of information and a response they weren't expecting. So they want to then go, well, okay, why? I need this more information. And I think it's around that tactful approach, but we've become forced into these binary positions in everything in society. And the same thing is happening in medical versus adult consumer, whether it's happening in these psychedelic circles that are seeking to deal with depression and these other issues that I would argue are consequences of societal construct. That is because people are impoverished, because they are worked 90 hours a week, because they can't afford to keep their kids clothed and fed. They can't afford their kids' education. They don't believe their kids are going to have a world to grow up in because of all of these other factors that should be dealt with politically. We've created an entire industry to pathologize their suffering. And so I think, yes, depression, anxiety, mental health disorders do exist by all means. But I think by basically going, you're maladapted to our system, therefore it's your fault. Go join the queue, find out what's wrong with you, and medicate yourself into submission.
Why are we not looking for the cause as opposed to the answer?
So I think part of this is then, this will bring me on to my last point because I'm aware of the time of this recording. The myths, it's the narratives that pervade that I think really cause a lot of damage. So one of the fields of science that I think that you've been quite interested in recently that I wanted to get your thoughts on was around pregnancy and consumption, because my understanding is that anandamide, which is effectively the endogenous cannabinoid version of the phytocannabinoid tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, is most abundant in women and in breast milk. So if we're literally babies, as Trev Coleman's quote here, saying that when you give a crying baby breast milk, it's not because it's happy because it's hungry, it's because it's stoned off your tit.
I don't like that phrase. However, it's a bonding molecule. How many times have you had a smoke with someone actually and said, "I'm going, let's sort this shit out. Let's," and it is. I think there's a lot of stigma around, pregnancy and cannabis consumption. I know from personal experience of friends who had prescriptions, who were prescribed cannabis, were told to come off of those. They would no longer prescribe them cannabis while they were pregnant, but would carry on giving them their opiates. No problems, opiates, not whatsoever. So the baby can be born with an addiction to opiates, but we're not going to expose it to phytocannabinoids.
See, the only excuse I would have thought was there of them saying the reason pregnant women shouldn't smoke cannabis. I would have thought it would come down to their understanding that cannabis damages the lungs because they don't understand the bronchial dilatory effects. They don't understand the therapeutic potential benefits of THC toward the lining of the lungs, which actually helps negate and protect against even nicotine consumption, tobacco consumption, which is why we see less prevalence of lung cancer in cannabis and tobacco consumers who consume them together, because there is almost a protectant or offset. There's also anti-cancerous properties into the compounds in cannabis, which then could arguably mitigate any cancerous formations caused by the consumption of tobacco. If we then know what we've just said about anandamide, and then with the allowance of them to stay on these other prescriptions, if it's not then an argument of ingestion method, is it just ignorance that they're saying this, or is it because if it's an oil, I can't see why you couldn't. If the cannabis oil is supplementing the mother's endocannabinoid system, it improves her health. It regulates everything from respiration to reproduction. It regulates, and the clusters of, is it the CB2 receptors around the ovum and that region is highly concentrated. If they have these mass receptors and this compound serves and supplements those receptors, why the hell would we say no? Why are we at least not going, we have these potential links here, we're going to explore it? Why are they not creating data sets? Why are they not allowing certain women to do it that will then sign a disclosure, etc., to be part of trials? Why are they not thinking of this? Because to me, it makes sense that it would actually improve the baby's health. I'm not then arguing that kids as well should smoke weed, but then I think that supplementation of cannabinoids that are non-psychoactive or very low psychoactive would be beneficial to a developing system and brain.
You would think so. You would think that they would be open to, you could understand if this was a highly addictive drug. So benzodiazepines, they carried on for epilepsy. I mean, I was lucky enough, I had a fantastic father who was way ahead of his time, absolutely way ahead of his time, and actively encouraged me to continue consuming cannabis through my pregnancy. There, I've said it. I consumed cannabis through my pregnancy. My son, he's doing his A-levels. He's actually a highly intelligent young lad. He's got no problems. So to say that it, affects the developing brain is a problem. My mum consumed cannabis during having me, but she stopped a month before she was due to give birth. Her actual blood pressure went up dangerously high, and it nearly killed her when she actually gave birth to me. So surely consuming this is keeping more of these other danger problems. My mum had a hole in her heart when she was born, so just to fill you in a little bit there. So she already had a predisposition for issues with that. So I have epilepsy. So if I stop consuming cannabis, my seizures increase. So me having a seizure surely is worse while I'm pregnant than not consuming cannabis.
Hell yeah. This is just I say this for the record, I say this for everyone listening, and I'll emphasize this before I speak it. The narrative you have just spoken there could almost be read as supplemented cannabinoid system, then a self-induced deficiency was created, which would then allow other issues to proliferate and worsen the overall health of the host. I know it's a callous way of speaking it, your mother.
Yeah.
That would then affect development of the child in the later stages. We know the later stages of fetal development are neurological. Is there potentially, this is just, I'm putting a question out there, I have no idea and I'm not making a statement on it, potentially then a link of an absence of cannabinoids during pregnancy could lead to the birth development of neurological issues?
Could do. It is genetic and within my family. So there's already, there's a genetic, my auntie was epileptic as well. So there is a genetic element to mine. It's gone through my head, but it's certainly not hindered me in any other ways. But I think we also need to look at this in a bigger picture. What is the lesser of the two evils here? And I'm not promoting anyone to consume cannabis during pregnancy. Again, that has to be your choice. But what I think the stigma needs removing from this. I was on a women's panel a couple of weeks ago on Clubhouse with women who were consuming during their pregnancies, just using tinctures, so weren't smoking. And part of their healthcare plan, they would take a sample from the mother and the child. And if cannabinoids were found in the system, they would not give the breast milk of the mother to that child.
Forgive me for my naivety on the subject of the science of this. How do you what are the markers for endocannabinoids compared to phytocannabinoids? How is there a distinguished difference in research, in studying this?
So, for example, CBD is metabolized down to a 7-hydroxy-CBD within the body. It's also metabolized to, I think, a 7-carboxyl CBD as well, which is what is passed through the body. So you can see if a phytocannabinoid has passed through the body.
So it's a trace of the metabolism. So whereas an endocannabinoid is so perfectly designed, it disappears. It's absorbed, it's metabolized within, it literally appears and it's gone. This is why we have the issues with aesthetics, isn't it? They hang around on the receptor longer.
Yeah.
Right. So that doesn't tell them anything about the health of the parent or the child.
No, they're basing it on you are taking a narcotic, you are exposing that child to a narcotic. We will not allow that to occur anymore because in your breast milk will be a narcotic.
Despite the fact that it'll have anandamide, the thing that we're supplementing exogenously to make up for the thing that is deficient in the mum because of lifestyle choices, diet, and absence of this from our diet and from our option of healthcare. Or
we'll give them formula instead. We'll give them an artificial.
Yeah, and again, just Google baby formula lawsuit contaminations if you want there, folks, to have a look at the legitimacy of that industry. Yeah,
but it's all right. The baby isn't being exposed to cannabis. It's all right. But not being exposed.
This is the joke of it for me, because it feels, this is controversial, but I feel like in 50 years, there's going to be a thing where you will be given cannabis as part of your pregnancy package to ensure the health of you and the child. And then the first few developmental months and years, a supplement will be given to the child that is in some way a cannabinoid, that is supplementing that system, because it's not a case of, even if we regulate our own endocannabinoid systems the best that we can through exogenous means, we are in environments that are depleting and destructive to our systems because we're exposed to so many toxins. There are so many things in our food, in our water, the chemicals in additives, preservatives, things that are deemed okay to human health, or what they consider grass in this country, generally regarded as safe, which is one of the scariest acronyms I know. There are so many things that we take for granted that are just generally regarded as safe. We're typically safe, you know what I mean? It's terrible. We talked about those forever chemicals. They're not identified in any regulatory system as being dangerous to humans because those same companies that produce them didn't declare them as such. So we live in, a very dangerous world where we're being poisoned at every point. It's not a hyperbole to say that. There's 40,000 extra deaths in London in the UK because of pollution caused by the city itself. You know what I mean? There are measurable metrics of this where we can determine that it is toxins that are destroying us. So if then we understand what cannabis can potentially do for the environment to sequester carbon and gas poisons to us that are depleting and destroying us, it can renutrify soils to clean up the food sources. It can create packaging to remove these degrading and leaching chemicals that are endocrine disruptors and Schedule 1 carcinogens. It can do so much more than the regulation of ourselves. We either survive with everything cannabis or we don't survive. This is what it feels like we're on the precipice of, you know what I mean? And I feel like we are not us particularly, but the first sort of generation of people that are going, yeah, the war's going to be over. Cannabis is going to be everywhere, but we have to get it right. Otherwise, we're going to cause more problems than it will actually solve.
Yeah, we'll create a problem as such.
Yeah.
A problem that wasn't there. When I heard that about them not allowing the baby for the most important thing when you have a baby is to, I mean, I'm not calling anybody who couldn't breastfeed. This is not me saying that you're a bad mother because you didn't breastfeed, but the bond you get, and you know, that bond that you actually instantly get by breastfeeding your child is there's no other feeling like it in the world. There's nothing like it, and the health, the benefits from that as well.
The microbiome and everything, yeah.
To deny that for the first 2 weeks of a child's life is to me is just absolutely crazy.
Yeah.
If this was, as I say, a highly addictive drug, I could understand this.
But even still, that we know the damage. There are various psychological and anthropological studies out there that show the what is it called? Is it prenatal bonding? Whatever the term for it is that they use, it leads to determinative factors later on in life. In terms of relationship issues, in terms of participation in society, employment options, their projected income, everything else from those first few moments. So you're punishing the baby and the mom because you got a drug in your sit. It's like, well, even if they do, the baby already has it in theirs. They were gestated inside that mother. Their system is their system. They have it in already. As long as that mother isn't then going to continue using the damn thing, why not allow that to then you can retrospectively punish her if you want. If you want to still be a dick and monster and go after her, you do it when the kid's a year old or whatever else. You find a way to not damage irreparably, permanently that child's life chances.
Yeah, but why should she be punished?
She shouldn't, but I'm saying if you're going to arbitrarily do it, but even if with other substances is what I'm saying, that the benefit of denying them the continuation of actually a fix of a compound they're already deficient in because they've been removed from the umbilical ubiquitous reciprocal feed system. So they're not getting the compounds and things they were before. They're already deficient in it. So they're going to cluck and they're going to rattle and they're going to struggle when they're literally, their lungs are trying to breathe for the first time. Their organs are trying to function independently for the first time. I think that will cause far more damage. And retrospectively, when we can get rid of the full moralizing and bullshit of this and really look retrospectively at the statistics of this, will have caused far more infantile deaths, destruction, and destitute life trajectories than the potential net benefit it could have ever caused.
Yeah, but this is... Touch wood, this isn't happening in the UK. I don't. All I know is that I know people who was prescribed cannabis and then they were no longer able to be prescribed it.
Still, it's infancy here, so I feel that they haven't moved on it. Luckily, they've moved on things like driving and impairments. So the industry is listening to the patient population. So I do hope that there is a groundswell of women that are brave enough as you have been on this podcast to state that they have, or that if they choose to go through that. And again, I'm not saying that you should or you shouldn't. I voiced my opinion on what I think is the science and the
we need real world evidence.
Process. But exactly that. And the way that happens is people coming up and going, all right, I did this. Here's my anecdotal evidence. Here's my real world evidence. And then from that, start to build these studies. They say we need these triple blind placebo controlled things. They don't work with cannabinoids, cannabis as a full spectrum thing. So they're creating these branches and systems of novel compounds to work and create nuanced data to prove their product viability. Whereas if we could actually get real world data from people that are brave enough to step it forward. I mean, my current consensus thing of what I want to see for Unity is exactly what you were saying of testing. That if we could create an open source thing where you put drug testing everywhere, you partner with the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, all these other things, that metadata was accrued into an open source thing where everyone could tap into it. No one could privatize it, sell it, and make it into these other products. And then so everybody could be informed from this ever growing cycle of data from cannabis, from other drugs, from everything. It could even include mental health. So we could actually start to get a picture of why people are using certain compounds, what illnesses that they're dealing with if we want to pathologize their life consequence. If you're depressed because you can't afford to eat and you're using a drug, we'll say you're depressed, when actually I would say just give them money you could eat, you're not depressed. Boom. You might still choose to take the drug at that point, but you can, you know what I mean? And it can help reframe that discussion because we can start to see the classism, the still institutionalism, the racism that exists within this co-option and gentrifying of drug reform.
What we also have to realise as well is if we remove this stigma from mothers being you're consuming cannabis. If you've got to have a C-section, the anaesthetist really does need to know that you consume cannabis. They really need to, so that they can actually get the I can't let the words out.
Right.
They can get the actual the anaesthetic correct to what your needs, and that needs to be taken. But if you're a mum who's actually scared to say that, you're not going to get the correct treatment. And I think we need to remove that. As a mum, full stop. It's something that I am now brave enough to stand up for. And it's something I'm going to be doing more and more and speaking out to remove this stigma as a mum and to be open with people. I've always been open with my son about my consumption of cannabis. We speak openly about it and you know, use and abuse. And, you know, the correlate, you know, the relationship with alcohol and the relationship with, we're smokers. We've always have been. Me and my husband, we're not big drinkers at all. We're absolutely rubbish at drinking, if I'm honest. We hardly do it now. But I think we have a much healthier relationship due to that. And I spent a lot of time going into schools and being scared about them finding out what I did. But it was okay to listen to a group next to me going on about wine o'clock and mummy needing to open a bottle at 4 o'clock in the afternoon just to get through the day. I've been to kids' parties where, you know, it's no problems them opening the second bottle of wine. But if I was there to sit down and, you know, prepare a cannabis cigarette, and I'm trying not to use terminology like spliff because it's using, it's almost a demonized terminology like the word marijuana or skinning up.
It's loaded, yeah.
You know, why can't I do that? Why can I not consume some cannabis and actually then talk to the kids quite deeply about everything as opposed to getting pissed up and, you know, becoming arrogant and argumentative? Not everybody does, I'm not saying that, but why is that socially acceptable, but I'm demonized for what I choose to inhale?
So it's also kids, for the formation of consciousness in childhood, they are in tune to things beyond that which gets numbed in adolescence. I feel that the chemical and hormonal rush of puberty almost narrows perception, narrows our reality. And so I think kids pick up on body language far more. So they watch an adult go from, oh, the savior, my parents, these strong people, then get confused and arguing amongst each other, slurring the words, they're unsteady, and you're suddenly tearing apart their safety, their understanding, and they start to get this relationship of going that when they do that, I don't want to be around them, and you start to get these consequential behaviors and lessons that are learned by the child. Whereas then, as you said, the parents that I know that have spoken openly or even just quite privately to myself about it, they'll consume, not in front of their kids, they'll go consume, they'll come back and they'll hang out with their kids. But then if they'll sit and watch TV and they'll just interact with them, and the kids won't be, oh, you're stoned or you're RE. It's no different. They are just sat with them, exchanging ideas and being relaxed, showing their children that they are calm and relaxed. And I think that is a lesson that kids are losing these days, because they're getting the idea that you need to be constantly hustling, constantly trying to make money to survive. And that's the name of the game. And the way you relax by that is blowing your brains out with alcohol. And that cultural narrative, I think, needs addressing. And as you said, it comes from a challenging the myths and challenging the misconceptions, and people being bold enough to stand up, to really, truly stand up and tell their stories.
You know, it wouldn't be acceptable for me to say, oh, it's bong o'clock, but it'd be perfectly fine for me to go, it's wine o'clock.
Yeah, even in my own head there, the two sort of synesthetic images that appeared in my brain were, very different. The wine o'clock was very a middle class, very affluent room. It was a drinks bar. Do you know what I mean? Whereas the bong o'clock, even in my head again, with my attempts at challenging my perception, was a darkened room and was somebody huddled up trying to quickly smoke a bong so they can get out of and. You know what I mean? Blown. That was, again, and you think of my philosophy, my ethics, and that is still programmed into me from the media that I have ingested and from it's crazy. Once you start to be aware of it, it's then hard to maintain consciously to perceive it. But I think that is what we have to strive to do, is be aware that we're all indoctrinated, we're all lied to, not just by society and each other, but by ourselves, man. And then you ask sort of again why the LSD thing, it's because I need to get to a state where there is nothing. There is no, I can do DMT and do whatever and have the, but the true for me ego dissolution is LSD, because it fractures me in about 17 places across a room.
So that is where the need for synthetics comes in. So there still is a need. You say, I'm not anti-pharmaceutical, and I thank benzodiazepines for stopping me seizing. So I always like to be balanced with this, and this is why I came and said so yeah, LSD is a synthetic. You choose to take that, and there still is a need for those compounds. I think there's definitely a need for synthetics in life for whatever reason. But for long-term use of them, that's the question for me of what is the long-term effects of these? Do we understand them more? Why are they so much more socially accepted than these natural compounds?
I think part of it's racism in a lot of ways, because look at the cultures, look at the mushroom ceremonies, ayahuasca ceremonies, look at what's involved in that in terms of the iconography, the ceremony, I don't want to say pageantry, because I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I mean the way that it's dressed, the garb, the build up to it, everything seems so inaccessible to us Westerners. Where go to the doctor, give me the pill, and it's working in my gut, and I just get on with my day. I don't have to stop the thing that has made me ill. I don't have to address my life. I don't have to look at all of these other things to get well. I just take a thing and move on. And I think that because of that mechanism and this almost ingrained culturalism, if that's even a thing, maybe. Because I don't think it's necessarily a hatred of a race, but it's maybe just an aversion to other culture because they're not perceptive of it. They're not open to it because we've been kind of told that we're right and everyone else is wrong, but everyone is told that they're right and everyone's wrong. So it creates these pockets. And so I think that a consequence of these things has just meant that people just want the thing. So now it's suddenly acceptable, like look, Will Smith and that coming out, I took ayahuasca. You know, you've got all of the rappers and everybody's got a weed brand, you know, but a few of them, they speak it in their songs and whatever. But so there is these co-options and these adaptions and adoptions of parts of it, while leaving the ceremony, while leaving the mystery, while leaving the profound and that which is involved in it, that is equally as important, because otherwise all you're doing is taking these compounds and fortifying your worldview rather than questioning it. You're fortifying your ego rather than dissolving it. You're justifying your own bigoted worldview because the mushrooms told me so, because I'm so cool. Like you said, the 21-year-old shamans and anybody that, I mean, Terence McKenna said it, follow plants, not gurus. You know what I mean? That's, again, why I like to create these spaces for myself to get a really high dose, to listen to the plant, to get beyond myself, I'm going to control this little experience and get the outcome I want. That's not what they're there for. They're really not. It's not alcohol. It's not something you just stick alongside. It's not even cannabis that you can stick alongside. These things have to be intended to be used, whether it's then you're going to take MDMA at a rave or whatever, even suppose to a lesser and certain degree cocaine. The intention of the consumption changes the outcome of the consumption.
100%. And intent is a very important thing. I think we don't, as a culture now, we don't live in the now enough. We're too busy thinking about what we're trying to achieve over there. Are we going to get to that? Be that a holiday, be that, you know, your career advancing, how you're constantly looking how to get there, how to make more money, how am I going to buy a house, instead of living in now and right now and actually going, actually, well, that's pretty all right, you know, it's pretty good. I quite like this. Look at the birds. Look at all the trees we've got in this country. Look at the wildlife we've got. Why are we not? Oh, there's a squirrel lives in my garden. Mm-hmm. Oh, what's he doing? Why are we not looking at that and being thankful for that? Why are we constantly? I'm all about, yes, learning and trying to gain more knowledge, but let's live in the now instead of, you know, what we're trying to get to, this kind of programming we've had that you've got to go to work, so you've got a holiday, and that's an achievement to go on holiday. And I've got many friends saying at the moment, I just want to go on holiday. That, you know, that's all I live for every year. That's genuinely all you live for, is to go on those 2 weeks off. Yeah. You ain't living your life. Yeah,
yeah. And I think that it's what I worry that they're trying to remove from the psychedelic or entheogenic experience by creating these therapies and these treatment centers and whatever else, is those questionings. Yeah, you may get that, ooh, that flower's a little brighter, and ooh, that sky's a bit, but you're not going to get that, wait, what am I doing? What this is not the career I wanted. This is not who I wanted to be. Why did I say that the other day? Like, I truly believe that doubt and anxiety are necessary components of society. They are crucial parts of human experience. If you are not questioning yourself or anxious, there's something fucking wrong. If you literally believe if you know everything, you're wrong about majority of the things you know. Myself included, literally, I constantly have to, and I'm lucky enough to be humbled constantly in my work because everything is ever fluctuating and ever changing, and I learn more things that change and inform my opinion on it. To stay humble to the fact that I know fuck all. The more I try to learn, the less I know, and that paradoxically means that I know more because I don't know anything. I can answer a question when somebody says, "What's this?" and go, "Well, in my opinion, here's some knowledge or some information," but it doesn't mean I have any idea how the hell to apply that. But I think that by building, there's that base within us of knowledge and of experience through these substances that then gives us moments and markers to then apply that in different ways. So you could work in a field for 10 years and accrue knowledge that would actually make you perfect in another field, or even just in a different lifestyle, in a different country, in a different mode of existing. And until you have that break, which usually happens in a death, a marriage, or a childbirth, or terrible experience of illness, or things like that, people then go, oh, shit. And they start to question their life. And most of us turn to alcohol to then negate that. So we don't think about the big things. We get through the trauma, pat down the emotion, and move on with life. Whereas those things are meant, the same with anxiety, the same with depression. Even depression is depressed. You are in need of deep rest. You know what I mean? And Jim Carrey, of all people, spoke of it wonderfully. He said that depression is your self getting tired of the avatar that you are playing. That you're getting bored of the character. You know what I mean? And you have it, I'd have it several times a day where I'm literally like, especially with this is a Simpa Life podcast. I've branded everything as me. And it's like, how egoic is that? But it's like, it's not. What I'm trying to do is create a space for this is my life. These are the things I'm interested in. These are the networks that I have and what I'm trying to achieve and do. And constantly having to try and reevaluate that. And I think that is a positive thing that is impacting my work in a good way. Whereas too many people, I think, are fortified in these avenues that then they'll touch on mushrooms or they'll touch on DMT, and then they'll somehow talk themselves into that experience fortifying their pre-existing ideologies, mentality, you know?
I think I'm glad you actually mentioned anxiety, because a lot of people are using this it's been kind of branded as I've got anxiety and this is the reason why I can't for my behavior. And it's a reason, not an excuse. And I don't. We seem to have this culture at the moment. Oh, I've got anxiety, not realizing that anxiety is normal, and we all need a bit of anxiety. That's how we survive. If you're not anxious about something that it could kill you, how do you prevent it from killing you? Now, I'm not saying that you should constantly be anxious. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am kind of sort of trying to communicate, but not very well, is that I think there's at the moment there seems to be this jumping on using anxiety as an excuse for shitty behavior. And it's my anxiety that's causing this. It's my anxiety. And it's almost sort of branded as the latest excuse of not accepting the anxiety and saying, I need to deal with this. I need to confront it, instead of just keep using it as, I'm not going to do this because of my anxiety. Yeah. And really addressing the problem and facing it.
Yeah, it's interesting. It is really, it feels like people going, oh, I've got bleeding. So what cut you? What was the wound? What happened? And that's what I feel like our society is currently doing. We're all going around going, I've got depression, or I've got a personality type disorder, I've got a schizophrenia. Yes, some people do have these things and we can map them neurologically and we can medicate them, we can whatever. But the science on them is still very much in its infancy, unfortunately. We're only on the 5th iteration of the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual that informs globally and collectively mental health and accepted conditions. Part of one of the first one of that was homosexuality. So to give you an idea of kind of what we're still looking at within this life cycle of this, that then it feels like they're using, it becomes an excuse at the weaponized informative individuals in psychoanalytics, in psychiatry, in those fields of study, the ones that cherry pick to create the data that supports the status quo, which is you need to be anxious to operate in the system. Drink your 5 cups of coffee a day to make Starbucks rich. Chain smoke your cigarettes to keep yourself focused at work. Work those 2-3 hours extra that you're not getting paid for. Think about work when you're at dinner. Let the box send you an email at 4 a.m. And we allow ourselves to be, we're acceptant of a hyper anxious state that is necessary to facilitate the current continuation of the system so that we can have just enough money to pay our mortgage, to have the cars, to keep up with the Joneses, as you say, to do all these other things. When actually, if we go, whoa, what do we actually need? Calm it down and pause and go, actually, we don't need 3 holidays a year. That's a lot. I know a lot of people that have done that from COVID that have gone, we don't need to spend $5,000 a year on holidays. What were we doing? $5,000 in this country means we go away every weekend. We eat takeaways. We do, and it builds the every day better. And so I think that it causes those perceptual sort of changes, really. And I think that anything we can do to facilitate that, whether it be collectivism around a philosophy of even religious, spiritual sort of beliefs, whether it is around community development of people that want to dance to a certain genre of music, people that are obsessed with a certain film or TV show, people that are gamers, people, whatever your community, whatever your collective group is, there is that ubiquitous acceptance that is an expression of humanity. And drugs are part of that. And I think we are the last kind of group. We've got a global collective measure for all that's still flawed of acceptance of sexuality, of gender differences, of racial and ethnic protections. We're supposed to have basic human rights for all of these things, but then the drug consumers and the people that choose to modulate and alter their consciousness are still criminalized, demonized, and vilified. So rather than them just co-opting our substances and leaving us vilified, criminalized, and demonized, they have to bring us back into the fold.
Definitely.
All right. I feel that, oh my God, that's some time. I've got one question, my question. You're going to be back here in 12 months. Of course you are. You're going to be here for episode 100 and whatever it is. What do you think is going to have changed? Where do you think we'll be?
What do I hope or what do I think?
Concise bit of both.
Right. Well, I hope the UK gets a domestic supply and we get this prescription cannabis sorted out so that patients are getting something they are happy with, that they deserve. That's what I hope for. What do I think is going to happen? I think we're going to be in the same place we were. I don't think we're actually going to see a change. I think we're going to see the hydroponic industry suffer over the next year. I think we're going to have a bumpy ride coming there. I think we're going to lose some big connoisseur growers. Personally, I think we're going to see some quality disappear from the legacy market, but I think it will come back again. I hope we don't this time, in a year's time, I hope that we're not sat there going, we have to have COVID passports, that I have to have paperwork in order to walk in a restaurant. I really hope that doesn't happen. From what I've seen in the last 3 years, I don't think we'll be any further forward in a year's time. I think we've got a good 5 years before we've actually made any real proper progression.
Yeah. I think, unfortunately, regardless of your personal philosophies or opinions towards the passports, the vaccines, or the situation of the status quo, the change in the zeitgeist and in the way that society operates, I think, is basically all but assured that the UK is going to be the last domino to fall, as it were, in Europe, and is going to be it's going to be a blood sport, I feel, between the corporations. From the conversations I've already had, even just last week with some CEOs at one of the UK events, there are companies that are just shopping around. They don't know where to lay their hat. We don't know if we're medical, if we're hemp farmers, if we're wellness, or we're sport. They're just cannabis producers, and they're happy to sing whatever the lie is, whatever the narrative is that gets them producing and making money in whatever region. And I think that, the CBD industry is not going to move forward. I feel that it's only going to become more monopolistic.
Yeah, and I hate to say that, I'm just being realist. I wish I could be all like, it's all going to be all okay, and we're going to see recreational, and everybody can use adult, and it's all going to be all okay. And I honestly don't think in this country, I don't think we're going to move any further forwards. I hope I'm wrong. I really do hope I'm wrong. But we've seen over, 2 decades?
Yeah. It's one of the things where I am a diehard optimist. Otherwise, I wouldn't do what I do. But I'm also a fucking realist. And it's greatly comforting that over the past 18 months, I've seen a lot of my predictions and prophecies fulfilled, but deeply disconcerting that I warned, even if there's only a handful of people were listening, I still tried to warn people. I still tried to scream it. I wrote a call to arms. I said everything that I could say at the time, and I'm trying now to create conversations where we create unity and alternative models. We can't fight this anymore. There will be whatever model they want. There will be ubiquitous global legalization under their model of what I would consider to be Prohibition 2.0. But in that time, we can conglomerate, we can connect across borders, across languages, across regions, and learn the true history of this plant and really plot from that a trajectory forward that frees humanity from the same corporate interests that criminalized cannabis that are now set to profit from it. We can be liberated, and it starts with honest dialogue and conversations, and hopefully maybe for you guys, not 3 hour and a bit long ones, but still, I believe that this is how we change the world, Callie, to be honest with you. I feel that it's all well and good with the picket and the pitchfork and everything else, but until we understand the world we live in, until we can admit and be honest and truthful and transparent with each other, I don't think we're going to get anywhere.
I think it's coming. I think we are. This global event that's happened. I think in 10 years' time, we're going to look back at this and we're going to be in a new world that's different and better. But it's not going to happen next year. And I don't think it's going to happen in the next 5 years. This is going to, I think, a whole generation ahead. This is going to improve.
Yeah. And well, for you fine folks at home, I'll be sat here entertaining y'all. Well, Callie, it's been a privilege and a pleasure as always. Thank you very much for giving me the sheer amount of time that you have this morning. I do appreciate it.
No problem, mate.
All right. I will include links to your plugged paper or the new book, is in the link below, as well as where you can keep up to date with all of Callie's amazing work. And I would even say activism these days. You've become quite outspoken against the narratives that are out there. And I respect and appreciate that. I really do. And it's it's humbling to me that you attribute a conversation of me basically not shouting at you, but kind of shouting at the world to kind of push that forward. So I'm less shouty these days.
No, you're brilliant these days, Doug. You've blossomed so much, and it's lovely for me on the outside to see that.
Well, yeah, but mutual love there for y'all to settle in your ears as you go off now to realize that it's still maybe daylight wherever you are. And it's going to feel like walking out of a cinema to you, I imagine, just like, the eyes, get the popcorn and the snacks off you and go figure out what your day's got to hold. I hope it's full of beauty, love, and connection. So yeah, thank you, Callie. It's been a pleasure and a privilege. Folks, if you enjoyed this, do check us out on patreon.com/Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee a week, you can help me keep this little project of mine going, flourishing, and moving forward, as I will be rebranding and rebuilding the website as more of an informative hub. Ooh. But yeah, check us out on all social media at Simpa Life. I've been Simpa. This has been the wonderful Dr. Callie Seaman, and you have been awesome. Just take care of yourselves. Peace and love, folks.